My name's Ryan Miller, 31, single, and about 2 paychecks away from selling plasma again. The past year has been one long streak of almost landed a full-time gig, almost made rent on time, almost got my old truck to stop leaking oil. I was laid off from my warehouse job last March and have been piecing together side hustles ever since. DoorDash, junk hauling, flipping estate sale furniture, anything that'll pay by the end of the week. That's how I got into storage units. It started simple. Buy a unit, dig through it, flip what you can. Sometimes it's just moldy couch cushions and old tax documents. Sometimes it's a vintage guitar, or someone's coin collection, or electronics they forgot they owned. You roll the dice, open the door, and pray something in there is worth more than the $300 you dropped on it. It's a little like gambling, but with fewer flashing lights and more dust. I started with the cheap ones, units nobody wanted, ones listed as unclaimed for 7+ years or owner deceased, the real junk piles, because once in a while, one of those turns up gold. Last Tuesday, I hit up an auction in Riverside, industrial part of town. Old lot tucked behind a shuttered Payless and a chain link fence that probably hadn't seen a coat of paint since the 90s. Only 5 units up for bidding, and most of the usual flippers were already zeroing in on a furniture heavy one that looked like it might have mid-century chairs. But I noticed one off to the side, unit number 83. No photos, no description, just unopened since 2012. No known contact. Contents unknown. It had a red tag zip-tied to the lock, but no one else even glanced at it. Auctioneer said he'd include it at the end, but made no promises about what was inside. Might be totally empty. Might be full of rat droppings. Might be mold. I won it for $120. Nobody else even bid. The lock was a thick brass one, different than the usual, almost military style. The guy running the place had to come out with bolt cutters, muttering the whole time about how the last person to rent it paid in cash and never answered their phone. When the door finally rolled up, I was hit with the unmistakable stale air smell. Dust, rust, and a weird, cold, metallic tang, like old blood on a steel pipe. It wasn't empty. It wasn't packed either, but it was organized. That was the first weird part. Most units are just piles of forgotten crap. This one had everything arranged in neat rows. 2 plastic crates full of books, stacked and labeled. A standing wardrobe pushed against a back wall, and a workbench. A legit full-sized workbench covered in tools I didn't recognize. Not your average garage stuff either. No hammers, no drills. There were blades, hooks, metal tools with etchings I couldn't read, things that looked custom built for jobs I didn't want to know about. I stepped inside, on edge. The air felt heavy. I reached for my phone and started taking photos, just in case I needed proof of what I found. And then I noticed the wardrobe was bolted to the ground. Not just bolted, welded, as if someone really didn't want it moved. Curious, I walked over, opened it. Empty. Except the floor of it looked weird, thicker than it should have been. I knocked on it. Hollow. I dropped to my knees, ran my hand along the edge, and felt a tiny groove. A latch? A square of the floor popped up slightly. I grabbed the edge and lifted. Beneath the false bottom, there was a ladder. It disappeared into darkness. And I swear I felt cold air rising from it. I hesitated for a long minute. There wasn't any light coming up from the shaft, just that steady stream of cold air, like the unit was exhaling. The ladder was iron, old but solid, bolted to the inside of the hidden chamber. I couldn't see the bottom. I pulled out my phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it down the hole. Concrete walls. The beam lit about 20 feet before it vanished into black. No obvious bottom, no smell, no sound. Just air, dry and stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. I should have walked away, but I'd paid for this unit, which meant this was mine. Whatever was down there belonged to me now. I grabbed a wrench from the workbench and tucked it into my jacket pocket, just in case, and started climbing. The metal rungs creaked, but they held. 10 feet, 15, 20. The temperature dropped with every step until I was sweating with nerves but shivering from the cold. My boots touched concrete and I froze, letting the light sweep the room around me. It was a bunker, square-shaped. No windows, no door. Just concrete walls lined with industrial shelving and steel cases. A single bulb hung from the ceiling by a frayed wire, long dead. The air smelled like leather, dust, and something faintly electric. To my left, a row of black plastic bins. Each was labeled in faded white marker. Hunter Kit. Number 3, Eastern Variants. Photos, verified entities, 1972 to 2004. Salt, silver, bone. To my right, maps, dozens, folded, pinned, some spread out across a drafting table. Most had red markers, handwritten notes, strange coordinates. A few had faded stains, dark brownish red. I opened one of the kits, and inside, wooden stakes, carved and old. A revolver with strange engravings along the barrel. Vials of liquid, blue, amber, green, each labeled in shorthand. A notebook with half the pages torn out. The rest, notes, field notes, dozens of entries, all in jagged handwriting. June 18th, 1996, Utah. Type 2 mimic, female presenting. Notes: took over local librarian's life, didn't feed for months, finally cracked and drained a family of 4. Burned out the nest, no survivors, no backup. Still hearing it sometimes, in dreams. Not sure it's dead. I dropped the notebook and backed up. This was real. This was all real. I moved to the back wall, where a massive corkboard had been bolted in place. Strings ran between Polaroids, clippings, and hand-scribbled notes. It was like stepping into the middle of an investigation, one that spanned decades. The photos were what got me. Each one was labeled with a name, age, and location. At first glance, they looked normal. People at parks, bars, schools, walking down the street. But the longer I stared, the more wrong they became. One man's shadow didn't match his pose. One girl had no pupils. Another guy had no reflection in the window behind him. And then there was the last photo. It was tucked in the bottom corner of the board, half covered by a faded receipt and a push pin jammed in sideways. No name, no age, no location. Just a black and white Polaroid of a man standing in front of what looked like a motel room. Number 6B. He wore a long coat, hands in his pockets, and was looking straight at the camera. His face was clear, but the moment you focused on it, it felt like your eyes slid away. I blinked, looked again. He was smiling. Too wide. It was wrong. I pulled it from the board. On the back, in smudged pencil, was, "Do not engage. Follow-up required. See file 6B. I looked around. There were no drawers, no filing cabinets, just more crates and bins. Eventually, I spotted a trunk tucked behind a tarp and a rusted folding chair. Heavy thing. Inside, rows of manila folders marked with codes and dates. I dug until I found 6B. The file was slim. The first page was a map. Tennessee. A motel circled in blue ink. Room 6B. The caption next to it. Same subject, same face. 1983, 1996, 2009, 2022. Unconfirmed. Moving west. The next few pages were photos. Not the creepy kind. Just surveillance-style shots. Blurry zooms of the same man in different places. Different clothes. Always alone. Always looking toward the camera. Never aging. Then came the field notes. Typed. No header. No names. Encounter outside Motel 6B. Chattanooga outskirts. Male subject observed entering and exiting room without ever using a key. Same walk, same posture, same facial structure as 1996 incident, confirmed by 2 prior agents. 2 locals reported missing. Their cell phones pinged near the motel before going dark. Blood trace found in drain behind Unit 6B. DNA inconclusive. Local PD unaware. We pulled out before they could question. No viable way to stop him. Tracked him west, maybe using the train system. Rarely sleeps. Eyes glow under infrared. That was it. The file ended with a printed screenshot, a time-stamped security cam still from a train station somewhere in Kansas. The same man, same coat, same face, looking up at the camera, eyes faintly lit. My skin went cold. There were at least 20 other files like this in the trunk. I skimmed a few. Different creatures, different sightings. Some local. Riverside, Bakersfield. One said something about feral changelings near a rest stop on I-5. Another was just labeled Chatterbox and marked with a blood stain on the inside of the folder. But this one, this 6B thing, it wasn't just a random sighting. Whoever ran this place, they were watching him for decades. And then they stopped. No closure, no success, no confirmation. Just one last sighting 3 years ago. And then nothing. I stood there, holding that photo, and suddenly the whole bunker felt smaller, like the walls had moved an inch closer while I was reading. My phone buzzed. Low battery. I didn't like being down here anymore. I carefully put the file back, relocked the trunk, took one last look at the board. That photo, I shouldn't have pulled it off. I pinned it back in place, just like it had been. The man in the coat stared back. Crooked smile, cold eyes, same door behind him, room 6B. Same feeling in my gut, like he was looking at me. I backed away, turned off the light, and climbed the ladder without looking down. I shut the unit, rolled the door down, locked it, even looped the old red tag back through the latch like that would somehow seal everything back inside. I knew it was stupid, but it made me feel better. The whole drive home, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Back at the apartment, I dropped my keys, kicked off my boots, and fell onto the futon. No lights, no dinner, just the silence and the leftover cold. It was too much. The tools, the files, the wall of faces. The man in that photo, standing in front of the motel door, looking like he knew something I didn't. I mean, it had to be a prank, right? Some elaborate setup? Like one of those immersive escape rooms for horror fans. But that didn't explain the age of the paper, or the dust, or the photo timestamp from 1983 printed on the back of that motel picture. I didn't mean to fall asleep, but sometime after the second hour of lying there with my heart pounding, I crashed hard, and I dreamed. Me standing in the storage unit with the door open, looking down into the hole. The ladder stretched longer than before, vanishing into pitch black. Something was moving down there, breathing. I woke up sweating. Late afternoon sun was bleeding through the blinds. For a few minutes, I just lay there, frozen, staring at the ceiling. Then I sat up, grabbed my backpack, and repacked it. Flashlight, wrench, power bank, granola bar, and bottled water. I tossed in some gloves this time too. I told myself I just wanted one more look, to see it again in the daylight. Maybe take a proper video. Something to prove to myself it had really happened. But I knew the truth. I wasn't done with it. And it wasn't done with me. By the time I got back to the storage lot, the sun was already starting to dip behind the old strip mall across the street. I parked around the side so no one would see me from the road. Unit 83 was still closed, still locked, still exactly as I'd left it. But now I had the key. I unlocked the latch, pulled open the door, and for a second, I half expected everything to be gone. The tools, the wardrobe, the cold air, like maybe I'd imagined it all. But it was there, just as I left it. The same heavy silence hit me the second I stepped inside. I pulled the door down behind me and clicked on the flashlight, walked straight to the wardrobe, opened the hidden panel, and stared down into the dark. I took a deep breath and started climbing. The ladder groaned, metal cold through my gloves, and I moved slower this time. I just wanted to see every detail clearly. I wanted to understand. When my boots hit concrete again, I turned in a full circle, letting the flashlight sweep the place. Same bunker, same wall of bins and crates, same map table, cork board, trunk in the corner. But this time, I didn't go for the files. I walked to the board. I stared at the photo of the man in front of Motel 6B. His coat looked old, like wool. His hands were still in his pockets. His shoes were polished, but there was something in his posture, not relaxed, but ready, like he just heard something behind the camera. I pinned it back exactly where it'd been, then turned toward the metal shelving along the far wall. Most of it held gear, kits, boxes labeled in shorthand I couldn't decode. One shelf had sealed cases filled with old camcorders, DV tapes, and thick black cords. I opened one of the tapes, and the label read, 6B, Daylight, Stationary Cam, 2009. I didn't have a way to play it. But there were at least 6 more tapes with the same code, some older, some marked no audio or do not watch alone. I moved on. There was another primary bin labeled Entity Logs, Classified, Primary Threats. I cracked it open. Inside, there were spiral notebooks, half-filled legal pads, printed email threads with most of the lines blacked out. I flipped through until something stopped me. A page near the back of one legal pad, sketched by hand, almost like a courtroom artist's drawing. The man from the photo. Only now, he had features. Wrong ones. Longer fingers, the mouth opened wider. Strange teeth. His eyes were gone. Just dark hollows, smudged like the ink had been rubbed after drawing them. Beneath it, written in pencil, "Smile does not move, only grows." I set the pad down carefully and turned to the final shelf. This one had just a single locked black box. On top was a note. "If found, do not act alone. See logbook Red A." Red A wasn't anywhere I could see. No shelf label. No box that matched. I stepped back and looked at everything again. This wasn't a workshop. It was a war room. And whoever had used it last, they were losing. I scanned the bunker one more time, slower this time, letting my eyes follow the edges, the seams, the shadows. There was something here I hadn't noticed, something I'd missed. In the far corner, past the ammo crates, past a stack of burlap sacks labeled bone dust, clean, there was a filing cabinet, a short one, wedged tight against the wall under an old coat rack as if someone had tried to hide it behind junk. The bottom drawer was dented, locked, but the top was already slightly open. I knelt down. Inside, just one thing. A red journal, leather cover, curled at the edges. No title, just a burn mark near the corner that looked like a branded letter, or maybe a symbol. The light caught it just enough for me to make out Red A. I sat down on the concrete floor and opened it carefully. The handwriting was tight, mechanical. No wasted loops or flourishes. This wasn't someone venting their feelings. This was documentation. A ledger. The first half was filled with creature profiles. Names, types, weaknesses, classifications. Most I didn't recognize. But around the halfway point, a new heading was scribbled in darker ink. 6B, code, blackout. I turned the page. First sighting verified 1952, Missouri. Confirmed visual match to 1967, 1981, 2009. Same face, same clothing. No signs of age. Attempts to follow unsuccessful. Entity enters room 6B. Door closes. Exit never witnessed. There were location tags, all rural, all isolated, all motels with the same floor layout, same numbered door. Feeds discreetly, it read. Always leaves town before full investigation. Evidence suggests does not kill indiscriminately. Targets chosen. Patterns unclear. Then a list of names, cities, victims. All disappeared. It read silver ineffective, Religious symbols ineffective. Subject maintains human appearance in daylight. Nighttime behavior unknown. No footage confirmed. Another page, then a sketch. Crude, pencil on paper. A figure in a coat, except the coat was drawn open, and underneath it wasn't flesh. It was segmented and rib-like. The chest was split open, almost like insect wings folded out from the center. Dozens of thin, clawed arms extended from the cavity. The caption beneath it chilled me. Final form observed. Hunter R. Whitlock, last seen 2009, Georgia. Presumed dead. This was it? This was the last entry. It read, tracked to roadside motel, room 6B. Confirmed subject still active. No exit observed. Waited 9 hours. Approached at 2:31 a.m. Knocked. Door opened. He was inside, awake, standing, like he expected me. The writing got worse near the bottom, slanted, rushed. It read, I fired 3 shots into the chest, point blank, center mass. Subject did not fall. He smiled and said my name. The final sentence wasn't written. It was carved, pressed so hard into the paper, the page beneath had nearly torn. It read, how did he know my name? That was it. I closed the journal and sat in silence. For a long time, I didn't move, didn't think. My hands felt numb, and the concrete floor beneath me felt colder. There was no dramatic twist, no final answer, just a dead end with one terrifying truth. Whoever this monster hunter was, he failed. And the thing he was tracking, it's still out there. I sat there for what felt like an hour, the red journal heavy in my lap. I wasn't a monster hunter. I didn't know spells. I didn't even own a gun. But the idea of walking away, of knowing this thing was out there and doing nothing, that was worse. If I couldn't stop it, maybe I could do the next best thing. Figure out who it was going after next. And try to save him. I packed up the red journal, snapped a few more photos of the room and the cork board, and climbed back up the ladder. When I reached the top, I shut the false bottom and locked the wardrobe back in place. The air in the unit felt thicker now, like it knew what I'd seen. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my tiny kitchen table with the journal laid out in front of me, scribbling notes on a yellow legal pad. The names in the file were mostly first names only. No last names. Some just locations and ages. A lot of them were dated 1981, 1996, 2009, always spaced about 13 years apart, which meant if the last confirmed sighting was 2009, then 2022 was the next cycle. We were already in it. The sketch in the journal showed a motel door, room 6B. I checked online, figured it'd be a stretch, but maybe there was a connection. It took me 3 hours, but eventually I found it. A motel off the I-10, a few miles outside a small town in central Texas. Still had an active listing online. One of the photos showed the layout of the building. And there it was, room 6B. Same numbers, same exterior, same corner tree. My stomach dropped. I called the number on the website, and a woman answered. She sounded tired. I asked if someone was staying in room 6B. Said I was doing some family history and was curious. She said no. That room was booked out long term. A man, quiet, paid in cash, been there 6 weeks. I asked for a name. She paused, said she couldn't share that. But then she slipped up, muttered something under her breath. That guy gives me the creeps. That was all I needed. I packed a bag, just essentials. Phone, flashlight, snacks, journal. Then I stopped myself. The silver hook. I didn't know what it was for, just that it was old, heavy, and carved with symbols I couldn't read. I threw it in anyway. What was I even gonna do? Knock on the guy's door? Tell him I knew he was a centuries-old monster and that, he should probably cut it out. No. But I could watch. I could wait. I could see if someone else showed up. And maybe, just maybe, I could figure out who this thing was going after. The drive took a day and a half. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Didn't post about it online. Just drove, checked into a cheap roadside inn a mile away, and waited. I parked across from the motel each night, using a pair of old binoculars I found in a thrift store on the way. Room 6B had the curtains drawn. Every night between 2 and 3 a.m., the light came on. No one ever entered. No one ever left. But on the 4th night, a car pulled in around midnight. A woman stepped out. Young, probably early 20s. Long dark hair, backpack slung over one shoulder. She walked to the lobby, checked in, and was handed a key. 6A, right next to him. I watched her enter, door closed, light on. My hands started sweating. The night passed. Nothing happened. Next night, same routine. Light in 6B came on, then off. Nothing else. But on the 3rd night after she arrived, she came out to smoke. It was around 1:45 a.m. I saw her lean on the railing, staring off into the woods behind the building. She looked tense. Not scared exactly, just off, like she hadn't been sleeping well. I took a photo of her car, checked the plates, ran them through a public records database I paid $15 to access. Her name was Kelsey Romero, 23, from Phoenix. No criminal record, nothing weird, just normal. Which meant she fit the profile. The others in the Red A journal, they didn't seem like bad people, just unlucky. I drove back to the motel, heart pounding, sat in the dark and stared at the file. And then I did the one thing I told myself I wouldn't do. I drove to the motel, parked, got out, and I walked up to her room. I knocked. After a long second, the door cracked open. She looked through the chain, cautiously. Yeah? Sorry, I said quickly. My name's Ryan. Look, I know this is gonna sound insane, but I need to talk to you. Just give me 2 minutes, okay? If it sounds crazy, I'll leave. She didn't answer right away. Just stood there with her hand on the door, her eyes flicking from my face to the parking lot behind me. I could tell she was calculating whether to slam the door or scream. Look, I'm not a creep, I added. I swear, Look, I've been researching this place. Room 6B. That did something. Her face twitched. A flicker of recognition, or maybe fear. The door opened another inch. What about 6B? I pulled the photo from my jacket, The black and white Polaroid, faded at the corners but still clear. The man in the long coat, standing in front of her exact room number. I found this in a locked file. It was taken here. Same room, same building. There's a note on the back that says not to engage, that this guy, whoever he is, he shows up every 13 years. She looked at the photo. I could see the moment it landed, the way her posture stiffened. She glanced back inside, then quickly back at me. And then without warning, the hallway light above us buzzed hard and died. The fixture gave one final flicker and blinked out, leaving a faint electrical hum in the silence. Through the gap in her doorway, I could see her bedside lamp flicker, dim, then return to normal. She sucked in a breath. I didn't say anything, just stood there and let it settle. After a second, she stepped out and closed the door behind her, still wary. But something had shifted. "You've got 1 minute," she said. "Start talking." We sat on the low curb outside her room. She kept her arms folded, like she didn't know whether to punch me or run. I laid the photo flat between us on the concrete. "Your room is part of something that goes back decades," I said. "I don't have all the answers, but I found a bunker, literally a hidden bunker, under a storage unit I bought last week. It belonged to someone who tracked things, creatures. This guy was the last one he wrote about." She said nothing, just stared at the Polaroid. The man's wide smile, the way the trees behind him seemed to ripple slightly, even in still print. "There were files," I went on. "Maps, case notes. Every 13 years, someone dies in or near room 6B. Always the same man. They called him Mr. Six." She finally looked up at me. "And you're what? Some kind of ghost hunter now?" "No," I said honestly. "I'm just a guy who bought a unit he shouldn't have. But I believe what I saw, and I think you're in danger." She looked away, chewing her cheek. The lamp inside her room flickered again. I heard scratching," she said. "Last night. Behind the wall. I thought it was rats or something, but the door to 6B, it's sealed. There's no way anything could get in there." I hesitated. There were scratches in that room before, in one of the old reports. Same place, I think. She didn't speak for a moment. Then, "I should just leave." I didn't argue. I just nodded. That's probably smart. She stared at the photo again. That same faded Polaroid, the man in front of room 6B, coat hanging past his knees, that too wide smile. Her eyes stayed on it longer this time. "You really think this guy's gonna come back?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. "I don't think he ever left." The lamp behind her flickered again. One hard pulse, like a dying heartbeat, then steadied. We both looked at the door to 6B. It was still sealed, still dark, but I could feel it. Like the hallway itself leaned in closer when she said the words. "I need to pack," she muttered. "I'm not staying another night." She stood up and moved toward the door. I followed her. "Can I help?" I asked. "At least until you're in your car?" She hesitated, her hand on the doorknob, still thinking, still cautious. Then finally, Yeah, fine. Just don't touch anything." Inside, the room looked normal, lived in. Clothes in a half-open suitcase, makeup bag on the sink. TV remote wedged between the bedspread and a wrinkled hoodie. But something felt very wrong. She moved quickly, started gathering shirts, her charger, while I stood by the door, eyes fixed on the connecting wall to 6B. It was quiet. Too quiet. And then something tapped once. Faint, like a fingernail brushing wood. She froze. I looked over. She'd stopped halfway through folding a jacket. The noise didn't come again. You heard that, right? I nodded. She zipped the suitcase and stood. Okay, that's it. I'm out, she said. We were halfway to the door when the TV behind us turned on. No sound. Just a blank screen with faint static bars drifting side to side, like water damage. A shape formed for a second. Maybe a figure. Then it was gone. I unplugged it. The screen stayed on for 1 second longer than it should have. She looked at me. Yeah, I am not sleeping in here again. We stepped outside. She locked the door with shaking hands and turned to me. Okay, I'm gonna grab a coffee or something, drive until sunrise, maybe call my brother in the morning. I nodded, but I could feel the hairs on my neck rising. There was a man standing at the far end of the lot. He was perfectly still and facing us. He hadn't been there a second ago. Don't look, I said. Just get in the car. She turned away, froze. He was gone. No footsteps, no motion, just vanished behind the edge of the vending machines. She unlocked the driver door, and I stepped back. She paused. Wait, she began. What about you? I'll be fine, I said. She looked like she wanted to say more, but instead she got in, slammed the door, and turned the key. The engine wouldn't start. First time, nothing. Second, just a sputter. Third, the headlights flickered once, then off. He was back. Closer now. Halfway across the lot. He wasn't walking. He was floating. Just a slow, steady glide. The lights overhead began to shut off one by one. Each bulb fizzed out in perfect rhythm, heading straight toward us, like someone hitting dominoes. With everyone that died, the darkness got thicker. Not just darker, but thicker, like the shadows were crawling inward. Kelsey turned. Car, now. We ran. I dropped the photo in the gravel. Didn't matter anymore. She fumbled with the keys, yanked the driver's side door open, and threw herself inside. I was right behind her, sliding into the passenger seat as she jammed the key into the ignition. Nothing. She swore under her breath and tried again. Still nothing. Outside, the last motel light above her door sputtered. Glass rained down. Now it was just us, the car, and the dark, and him. I looked up. He was closer now. Halfway across the lot, had become 10 feet. His face was still pointed right at us, though his head never moved. His eyes didn't blink. And his smile, that never changed. That wrong, too wide smile. Like he had all the time in the world. Kelsey. I know, she snapped, twisting the key again. This time the dashboard lights fluttered weakly. A pulse, then dead again. I was breathing too fast. My chest burned. The cold inside the car was worse than it had been outside, like the heater had flipped to reverse. And then I remembered the hook. The silver hook with the symbols carved into it, the one from the bunker. I didn't know what it did. I didn't know if it would work, but it had been packed with salt, silver, and bone. I remembered that. And it was still in my jacket. I yanked it out, flipping the blade open. It wasn't sharp in the usual way. It looked ceremonial. Used, not crafted. The etchings were dull, worn from blood or time, or both. Kelsey saw it and flinched. "What the hell is that?" I didn't answer. I just opened the door and got out. He was 5 feet away now, still not moving fast, just steady, like he was following a line nobody else could see. I raised the hook. His head tilted, just slightly. The smile stayed, but his glide, it stopped. It was small, barely a pause, but it was enough. I stepped forward, holding the thing out in front of me like a crucifix. My hand was shaking. Back off, I said. My voice barely came out. He didn't react, just floated there, watching. And then something flickered behind his eyes. A twitch. And the lights on the car flicked back on. "Kelsey," I said, "try it now." The engine turned over once, then again, and then roared to life. Headlights cut through the dark. The figure didn't flinch. He just turned his head the tiniest degree and looked straight into the beam. The smile dropped. I didn't wait. I ran back to the passenger side, dove in, and slammed the door. "Go." She threw it in reverse so hard I thought the transmission would stop. We fishtailed, skidded, then slammed it into drive and took off down the road, gravel and dust flying up behind us. I looked back once. He hadn't followed. He was still standing there in the parking lot, long coat hanging still, one hand lifted like he was waving. And the lights behind him, the ones that had gone out, they stayed dark. We didn't speak on the drive, just kept checking the rearview mirror over and over. I dropped her off at a diner 20 miles out. Bright lights, other people. Told her to stay inside until morning. She didn't argue. When I got home, I moved fast, grabbed clothes, food, anything I could carry. But just before I left, I spotted it. A scrap of paper, dead center on the kitchen counter. 5 words in thick, uneven ink. It read, "The light won't save you." I didn't stop to think. I didn't look around. I just ran out, slammed the door, and drove. We didn't go home after that. We met at the storage unit the next day. And we have been in the bunker for 3 months. We keep the salt lines fresh. Every door, every vent, every crack. I check them twice a day, sometimes 3. Twice now, we found footprints just outside the salt. Never closer. She took the side room, just a cot and a light. She doesn't talk much, but she hasn't left. And that tells me everything I need to know. We live off canned food, bottled water, and paranoia. We've got every file spread out across the table. Every photo, every old report. We have memorized the map. Red pins for sightings, black pins for kills. One white pin for us. We're the only survivors so far. We don't sleep well. She keeps her boots on. I sleep with a hunter's revolver under my pillow. Not that it would help. It didn't help him. And every night, just after midnight, the motion light above the steel hatch clicks on for half a second. Just once. Like a reminder. We don't talk about it. We just keep researching, planning, preparing. Because we got lucky once. And that's all it was. That was not a plan. That was a fluke. So now we work. She scans case files. I trace old sightings, build timelines, check names. We pin everything to the wall. Hotel registries, death reports, power outages, police calls that never made the news. And we've started to notice patterns. He always moves before the 13th year ends. Always changes names, changes cities. But the same face, the same grin, and the same door, 6B. I don't know if we can stop him. I don't think we can. But maybe we can get in the way. Last week, we found a case from 1970. Arkansas motel, same layout. Housekeeper vanished. No body. Room sealed. A photo turned up in the same file. Same man, same coat, same smile. We circled the next target on the map. It's only 6 months away. But this time, we'll be there first. We've learned more now. And sure, yeah, the odds are still against us. But we know to stay in daylight, to never sleep near the door, to bring salt, silver, and real cameras, not phones. We don't know why, but digital doesn't catch him right. Film does. We keep our bags packed. We stay off main roads. She's better with people, so she handles check-ins. I handle the maps, the gear, the exits. We don't try to be heroes. Just fast, quiet, sharp enough to spot the pattern before the thing in the coat shows up. We're not winning, but we're gonna save who we can. On April 5th, Samantha Granger went missing in the town of Daggerland. If you're from Ohio, perhaps you've heard of the place. More likely, you haven't. Daggerland is 60-some miles east of Cleveland, and if you blink, you'd miss it. Get on I-90, pass Euclid, Menor, and keep on going. It's not on most maps nowadays, and there may be good reason for that. It's not easy finding history on the place. I've looked up different accounts myself with little success. Articles date back over 100 years. I've heard everything from the town being part of an old shipping route that silted up and got abandoned, to farmland that went bankrupt during the Dust Bowl. There's mention of a fire along the coast in 1908, burned through a string of old boathouses and took a handful of men with it. After that, the paper trail thins out. It's the kind of place where every generation seems to bury the last one's secrets a little deeper. until all that's left is fog and rumor. All I know is our story starts with little Samantha Granger. Spring in Ohio was wet, especially along Lake Erie, but the first week of April was uncharacteristically bright. There were no clouds, no rain, and the town seemed a bit cheerier than usual. Winter that year had been especially dreary. If you've lived around snow, you'll understand the difference between the beautiful fluffy white kind and the quarter-inch of ugly sludge that seems to coat everything and gets onto your boots. When April came along, it caught the residents by surprise, especially the children, who had felt locked inside for what seemed like years at that point. That morning, the air was clear and the lake looked calm, unusually calm, like someone had pressed pause on the water itself. Birds were out, flags hung still. It was the kind of morning that made people open their windows just to let the smell of thawed earth drift in. A fresh, clean start. Samantha Granger was 8 years old. Quiet kid. Liked puzzles and purple shoes and collecting smooth stones from the beach. She lived 2 blocks from the shoreline, and when her mother turned around to grab her coffee that morning, Samantha was already gone, coat half zipped, barreling down the sidewalk like the world had finally opened back up. They say she must have gone to the water. The footprints stopped near the edge of the bluff, and her scarf was found snagged in a bramble bush just off the trail. But the beach itself, empty. No body, no drag marks, no sign of a struggle. And that's what makes Samantha different. The others, there were signs, broken glass, torn clothing. But Samantha, she just vanished. Like the lake opened its arms and swallowed her whole. "Anything?" George asked. The bathroom door creaked open. Laura stepped out slowly, still in her robe, eyes downcast. She didn't say a word, just shook her head once. George opened his arms, but she resisted. He reached out anyway, pulled her close, and held her without speaking, one hand resting at the small of her back, the other cradling the back of her head. "It's okay," he said. They'd been trying for over a year. Every month, hope flickered. Every month, it went out. "You're still young," the doctors had said. "It happens when it happens." But nothing was happening. Just silence and the slow ache of time. And let's be honest, 37 wasn't all that young for having kids. "I'm fine," Laura said, pulling away. "I know," George replied. But she didn't hear. She was already halfway down the stairs. For a moment, George stared out the upstairs window and thought. And then the radio interrupted him. It crackled, then hissed. "Sheriff Lost, you there?" Mendez's voice came through, calm but clipped. George blinked, pulled his gaze from the window. He stepped to the dresser, pressed the button on the handheld. "Yeah, go ahead." "We've got a situation down near the water. Little girl, Samantha Granger. Her mom says she hasn't seen her since this morning." "Okay, how long exactly?" "Couple hours. Said she turned around to grab coffee and the kid was just gone. She's worried she ran down to the beach. Apparently the girl loves it there." George was already moving, buttoning his shirt, grabbing his belt off the hook. "I'll be there in 10, he said. The weather held, even down by the lake. Bright sky, soft sun, the kind of early spring day people in Daggerland prayed for after a brutal winter. But as Sheriff George Lost stepped out of the cruiser, he felt it shift slightly. The wind wasn't strong, but at the water's edge it picked up, just enough to carry the smell of brine and damp weeds. He made his way down the familiar dirt path, boats pressing into thawed earth. Mendez stood waiting just past the bluff, near the rocks that overlooked the shoreline. She gave him a small nod. "Where's the mom?" George asked. "Up at the house. Deputies with her. Says Samantha took off a little after 8. Said she always loved the beach right after it rained," Mendez replied. George glanced down at the sand. "You get eyes on her yet?" Mendez motioned toward a narrow drop-off. "Come look." He followed her down to the beach. It was quiet. Not dead quiet, but still. A gull drifted overhead. The lake was calm. "There," Mendez said. She pointed. In the damp sand, you could see them. Small footprints, pressed clearly, headed toward the shoreline. George crouched beside him, following the trail with his eyes. They stopped maybe 6 feet from the edge of the water. No return prints. No sign of panic. Just gone. Something purple caught his eye. Caught in a thorn bush just off the trail, fluttering slightly in the breeze, was a child's scarf. He stared out at the water for a long moment. The sun sparkled off the surface. It looked harmless, even beautiful. But something about the stillness scraped at the back of his mind. "Call in drones, dogs, all of it," he said. Mendez hesitated. "You think she drowned?" "I don't think anything yet." But he did. He just wasn't ready to say it out loud. 2 days later, the town gathered at Holloway Park. No one made announcements. No flyers. Just a quiet understanding that they'd meet at the gazebo by dusk. The air was still mild for April. Low 50s, no rain. The last of the light bleeding out behind the trees. George arrived just after 7. He parked along the edge of the lot and walked the rest of the way in, keeping to himself. People were already there. Maybe 30, maybe more, scattered in small clumps, each holding a candle. At the very front, someone had taped up Samantha's school photo. It fluttered slightly in the breeze, the tape on the corners barely holding. A mason jar of violets had been set beneath it. A few stuffed animals. Nothing dramatic, just small, quiet things. Her mother stood near the post, alone, wrapped in a heavy coat, hands at her sides. She didn't speak, didn't cry, just stared at the picture like she was waiting for it to change. A few people began to hum. Not a song George recognized, just a low, uncertain harmony, like they couldn't agree on what comfort sounded like. He held his candle, watched the flame waver slightly with the wind. The crowd didn't move. No one sat. No one spoke. They just stood there in the quiet, ringed by cold and flickering light. Somewhere behind him, a child coughed. One candle went out, then another. George looked up. The wind had shifted. "Sheriff DeBase, come in. We've got a code 847. Repeat, code 847. Suspect is, extremely suspicious." George Lost paused in the doorway, coffee in hand, and just watched. 9-year-old Owen Winters sat behind his desk, legs swinging, eyes squinting in serious concentration as he leaned into the radio mic like it was a matter of national security. His backpack was still on, one strap slipping down his shoulder, and Crichton, a thin black German shepherd, was curled up at his feet like a shadow with ears. He followed Owen everywhere. "You know, we don't actually have a code 847, right?" George said. Owen turned, grinning. Then you should. George sipped his coffee. And what exactly does it mean? Owen looked thoughtful. I don't know, but it's dangerous. Crichton let out a low, lazy huff, thumping his tail once against the floor. George stepped fully into the room, setting his mug down on the edge of the desk. You break into my station again. No, I didn't break in, Owen said. The door was open. I'll have to talk to my staff about that, George replied. I left Crichton outside at first, just in case, Owen added, like that earned him points. But, he gets sad when I get too far. Crichton stretched his front paws forward and made a noise that sounded like agreement. George pulled the chair over and sat. Where's your dad? Hardware store, Owen said. I told him I wanted to come here instead. It's really close, so he said okay. George gave a small nod. He glanced at the stack of files on the corner of his desk, but didn't reach for him. Owen leaned forward, feet still swinging. It's kind of quiet around town. George looked at him. Quiet how? Owen shrugged. I don't know, people just act kind of weird. Nobody says anything, but they're looking around a lot. George raised an eyebrow. You always this observant? Owen thought about it. Observant? Crichton huffed again, ears flicking slightly. It means you notice things, George said. Owen grinned. I noticed lots of things, yeah. Well, maybe I'll put you on payroll, George began. But until then, get out of my desk. Owen smiled and slid out of the chair without a word. Crichton followed him, tail swishing low. The front door creaked open a few seconds later. There you are, David Winters said, stepping in. I told you to stay close. Owen pointed a finger at George. He let me in. David gave George a look. Is that true, Sheriff? Sheriff George Lost shrugged. David exhaled, shook his head. You bothering him? Owen shook his head. Well, did you eat yet? Another shake. All right, go let Crichton out for a minute, David began. And don't throw anything. Owen gave a quick nod, grabbed a leash from the wall, and led the dog outside. The door clanged shut behind them. David watched it for a beat, then turned back toward George. His voice dropped. She was in his class, Samantha. George nodded once. He hasn't said much, David added. Not about her, not about any of it. He's young, George said. Yeah, David began. Still feels like he knows more than he lets on, though, They stood in silence for a moment. Outside, through the front window, they could see Owen walking the dog and staying close. You think we'll find her? David asked. George didn't answer right away, and then finally admitted, I don't know. David leaned against the edge of the desk, arms crossed. It feels like the kind of thing we should know. George didn't respond. Outside, Owen jogged a little ahead of Crichton, holding the leash loosely. The dog didn't seem to mind, just stayed at his side, ears up, watching everything. You ever think, David said after a minute, that maybe we were better off not knowing what was out there? Like back when we were kids. You just assumed somebody else would handle it. George glanced at him. We are the someone. Yeah, that's the problem, David said. The station creaked faintly, one of those sounds old buildings make when they settle or remember. George stared at the window a while longer, watching Owen crouch down to tie his shoe, and Crichton knows it's something in the grass. He doesn't ask about her, David said quietly. Not directly, but he knows. He knows she's gone. George nodded. I don't know how to talk to him about it, you know. You'd think after losing Claire I'd be better at this stuff, but... David paused, cutting himself off. George waited, but nothing else came. Claire had been his friend too. They'd all been a group once. David hadn't said her name in a long time, and it was good to hear it again. She had died, but she wasn't gone. David gave a small smile, the first one since he walked in. The moment held, quiet, heavy, and just before it could fully settle, the radio crackled.
Sheriff Lost, you copy?
George stepped forward and picked it up. Yeah, go ahead.
It's Mendez,
Came the voice.
We've got another one. 8-year-old boy, Josh Maddox. Parents said he was riding his bike near the lake at Palmer's Bluff. That was about 40 minutes ago. No sign of him since.
George's grip tightened on the receiver. Is there a search party yet?
Already started. Found the bike tipped over, that's it, Mendez replied.
George set the radio down. David was already on his feet. You want company? George looked at him. You sure? David gave a quick nod. Yeah, Owen's grandpa's 2 stores over. I'll flag him on the way out. Have him take the kid home. George didn't argue, and the door shut behind them. Sheriff Lost stepped out into the late afternoon sun, the wind catching the edge of his jacket. David followed close behind, both men walking with purpose toward the cruiser. As George slid into the driver's seat, he keyed the mic on the dashboard. Mendez, it's Sheriff Lost. We're en route now, ETA 6 minutes.
Copy that, Sheriff,
Came the reply.
I've got 2 deputies canvassing the bluff, but no sign of the kid yet.
David buckled his seatbelt. Josh Maddox, that's one of Owen's classmates. George nodded. Yeah, I remember the name from the school visits. They pulled out onto the main road, lights flashing but no siren. Daggerland wasn't big enough to need one. Everyone moved over when they saw the cruiser anyway. Palmer's Bluff was just north of the main beach, a rocky outcrop that jutted into the lake like a bent finger. It wasn't far, a 10-minute ride on a normal day, shorter if you pushed the limit. David scanned the side streets as they passed, his fingers drumming against his leg. You think it's the same thing? He asked. George didn't answer right away. The truth was, he did. Deep down in that part of his gut that only ever spoke when something was really wrong, but saying it out loud made it too real. We'll see when we get there, he said instead. As they turned off the main road, the trees thinned and the lake came into view, wide, flat, and still gleaming under the late sun. A few figures moved near the edge of the bluff, one of them raising a hand as they approached. George parked near the old split rail fence and stepped out. Mendez met them halfway, hair tied back, clipboard tucked under one arm. Hey, parents said he was riding along the trail. They lost sight of him for just a minute. Mendez began. Deputies found the bike, but no sign of Josh. All right, where's the bike? George asked. Down near the path split. Come on, Mendez replied. They followed her through the brush, boots crunching softly on gravel and leaves. The trail sloped downward, veering toward a low clearing where the path forked. There, laying on its side just off the trail, was a small red bike. No scuffs, no skid marks. Just lying there like the boy had stepped off and wandered into the woods. George crouched beside it, fingers brushing the handlebars. No sign of a struggle. Well, nothing obvious, Mendez began. Just this and his backpack about 10 feet that way. George stood, squinting toward the waterline. The wind was stronger now, not rough, but steady. It carried the faint smell of algae and driftwood, something sour underneath. He turned to David. All right, let's split up. You take the bluff, I'll check the trail past the bend. David nodded and headed up the slope without a word, moving quick. George lingered. There was something off here, something quiet in the way the birds weren't singing, something about how the bike just sat there. And then he saw it. Near the edge of the clearing, a line of small footprints, half faded, pressed into the wet ground, heading toward the trees. And then nothing. Just the lake. George crouched, scanning the shoreline. The mud near the edge was dark and slick, but no obvious drag marks cut across it. He moved slowly, eyes adjusting to the glare of the late-day sun on the water. "Josh," he called, keeping his voice steady. "It's Sheriff Lost. You out here?" Silence. George followed the line of footprints again. They stopped barely 2 feet from where the reeds began. Something about the way they ended bothered him. No stagger, no shift in weight, no turn back toward the trail. Just gone. He straightened and looked out over the lake. The water was calm, but a faint ripple moved against the wind near the edge. It was subtle, almost easy to miss, like something had disturbed the surface and then slipped under. A branch cracked somewhere in the brush to his right. George turned, hand hovering near his sidearm. "Josh?" A small figure stepped out. Mud streaked the boy's cheeks, and his hair stuck up in clumps. He clutched something against his chest, a worn backpack, zipper half open. "Hey," George said softly. "You okay?" Josh didn't answer. His eyes darted past George, toward the water. Footsteps pounded down the slope. David appeared at George's shoulder, breathing hard. Relief crossed his face when he saw the boy. "Josh, hey kid, your mom's looking all over for you." Josh didn't move. His lips parted slightly, and for a second George thought he might say something. But then the ripple on the lake grew. It started maybe 20 feet out, pushing toward shore. Sunlight caught on something dark just beneath the surface. The movement was smooth, deliberate, not the random slosh of a current. As it came closer, the water shallowed just enough for a shape to break through. The head came first, sleek, black, wet, followed by shoulders that rolled unnaturally as they rose. Long arms ended in claws that scraped at the sand. And the mouth, it was full of very sharp teeth, curled into something like a grin. David spoke first. "What the hell is that?" Josh took a step back. David moved in front of him, one hand out to nudge him farther from the water. George stayed rooted, eyes locked on the thing as it stepped from the shallows. Each claw dug into the damp ground. It didn't rush. It didn't posture. It just kept walking, slow and certain, that grin never leaving its face. Sheriff? David said. But George didn't answer. His hand was already on his holster, thumb flicking the strap free. The creature stepped closer. The wet slosh of its feet against the sand was louder than it should have been. 2 more slow steps, claws sinking into the mud. Another step. The water line was behind it now. George fired a warning shot, but the thing kept moving. Then another. A puff of mist and black water kicked up from the creature's shoulder, but it didn't even flinch. George fired again, center mass. This time he saw the round hit, a small burst just under its collarbone. The creature staggered, just a fraction, but its grin stayed. Another step. "George," David muttered. Another shot rang out. The round hit dead in the chest, right where a man's heart would be. The creature looked down for a moment, then back up. George took a half step backward, boots crunching in the sand. He'd seen men get shot and keep moving before. Adrenaline, bad drugs, worse luck. But this was different. There was no pain in those eyes, no fear. The thing lifted one long claw and tapped the spot where the bullet had hit. Josh whimpered behind David. "Get him out of here," George said without looking away. David's hand tightened on Josh's shoulder. "And leave you?" "Now, Dave," George said. "Go." The creature took another step. The water behind it lapped quietly at the shore. David grabbed Josh by the arm and moved fast, hauling him toward the trail without another word. The boy stumbled once in the sand, but didn't complain. Within seconds, they were swallowed by the trees, their footsteps fading. George adjusted his stance, bringing the pistol back up. The creature watched them go, then turned its attention fully to him. That grin stayed fixed, water dripping steadily from its chin and the ragged tips of its claws. It took a step closer. George fired once, a clean center mass shot. The round hit with a wet thump, kicking up a spray of brackish fluid. The thing staggered, but only for a heartbeat before straightening again. Another step. George fired again. The bullet punched into its side. No reaction. George backed up 2 steps, keeping his sights locked. His boots found firmer ground near the grass line, and he planted himself there. He wasn't giving it the beach. 20 feet out. 15. The grin widened until it seemed to split its face. It tapped one long claw against the hole in its chest, smearing the black fluid there, and then let out a slow exhale. 10 feet. George's finger tightened on the trigger. The creature smiled. Its claws flexed slightly, dragging lines in the wet sand. It was close now. And then from behind, muffled at first, came voices. Men and women calling through the trees, footsteps crunching on the brush. The unmistakable sound of more than one person moving quick. "Sheriff?" "Mendez." "Over here," George said, eyes still locked on the thing. The creature's gaze shifted, not toward the sound, but back to him, like the rest of the world that didn't exist. The voices grew louder. Branches snapped. Boots hit the sand somewhere behind him. George blinked once. He angled his head to call again, and when he turned back, The shoreline was empty. No ripple on the water. No churned mud where it had stood. Just a calm lake and the faint imprint of claws in the sand, already filling with dark water that seeped in from the tide. He held his gun up a second longer, scanning the surface for any break, any shadow. But there was nothing. Mendez was the first down the slope, her boots skidding slightly in the damp sand. She stopped a few feet from him, chest rising and falling. "What happened?" she asked, eyes scanning the lake. George kept his gaze fixed on the water. "It was here." "What was?" Mendez asked. The rest of the deputies were spilling out of the beach now, their flashlights already cutting over the sand and reeds. None of them looked toward the water like they expected to see anything. "I don't see anything," Mendez said, stepping closer. "Was it the kid?" George shook his head. "No, not the kid." She followed his stare out to the lake. "Then what?" George finally looked at her, the weight in his expression making her pause. Mendez glanced back at the calm water, then to the wet claw marks near his feet. She crouched, touching the edge with her fingers. "These weren't here earlier." "No," George began. "They weren't." The wind shifted, colder now, carrying the faint smell of the lake up around them. Somewhere in the trees, someone called that they'd found David and Josh. George stared out at the water. "Let's get everyone off the beach." The meeting hall on Main Street wasn't built for crowds, but by 6 o'clock the following night, every folding chair was taken. A few people stood in the back, arms crossed, murmuring under their breath. The overhead lights gave everything a faint yellow cast, and the smell of coffee from the refreshment table hung in the air. George stood near the front, leaning on the podium like he'd rather be anywhere else. Mendez was off to his left, talking quietly with two deputies. David sat in the second row, Owen at home with his grandfather. "All right," George began. "Thanks for coming on short notice. I know folks have things to do, but this is important." A man in the back raised a hand. "Is this about Samantha?" George's jaw tightened. "Yeah, it's about her, and it's about Josh Maddox." That got the room talking again. A ripple of voices, quick and tense. George waited for it to die down. "I'm gonna be straight with you. 2 kids have gone missing near the lake in the last 3 days. One is still missing. One was found today, alive. For now, that's all I'm gonna say about the details." A woman in the third row frowned. "You mean the lake's not safe?" George scanned the room, meeting eyes where he could. "I mean this. Effective immediately, I'm asking everyone to stay away from the water. No fishing, no walking the shore, no late-night boating. Keep your kids away from the bluffs and the waterline day or night. If you see anything unusual, I don't care if it's a person, an animal, anything, you call my office right away. Do not check it out yourself." The room fell quiet, but the unease was palpable. "From tonight on, there's a curfew at 8 p.m. If you have to be out past that, you call my office and we'll send someone to help you. This is just until we've got a better handle on things." An older man in a work coat stood up. "George, we've lived here all our lives. You telling us we're not safe in our own town?" "I'm telling you to use your head, Jim," George began. Until we know what's going on, we need to be safe. No one moved to argue. A few nodded reluctantly. All right, that's all, George said. When the meeting broke, most people filed out quickly. Conversations kept to low murmurs. George stayed at the front, watching them go, until only a handful remained. David, Mendez, and 2 deputies. Mendez stepped closer. You think they'll listen? I don't know, George replied. Mendez pulled a chair closer to the podium and sat, resting her forearms on her knees. All right. What happened out there today? You've been dancing around it since I called you. George walked to the refreshment table, poured himself a coffee that had been sitting too long, and took a slow sip. You wouldn't believe me. Try me, Mendez said. David was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, his expression tight. I saw it too. Saw what? Mendez asked. George finally turned toward him. There was something in the water. It was tall. Had claws, he said. Mendez tilted her head. An animal? No, George began. It was standing upright. I think it was smiling. David's eyes flicked to the floor. George fired. Hit it once right in the chest. Didn't even slow it down. Mendez's mouth worked for a second before any words came out. And you're sure you weren't hallucinating? No, George said. It was there. And it was real. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Mendez rubbed at the bridge of her nose. So what's the plan? I don't know yet. But for now we keep people away from the lake, George said. And we stay ready. David pushed off the wall. If it comes back, I am not waiting for it to make the first move. George met his eyes, and for a moment the sheriff's tired expression hardened into something else. He thought of Josh. He'd taken the little boy home after what happened, and he was safe. But George thought of what might have happened if they'd been just 1 minute later. He shuddered. Outside, the night settled over Daggerland like a heavy blanket. The town hall had emptied out, leaving just the hum of old lights and the distant hush of the lake beyond. George took a breath, feeling the weight of the evening settle on his shoulders. They filed out quietly, leaving George alone in the stillness. For a moment, he just listened to the faint creak of the old building, to the distant lap of water against the shore. He reached for his sheriff's hat from the table, setting it low on his brow. His hand lingered there for a second before he stepped out into the cool night air. The street was empty, the kind of stillness that felt earned after a long day. Porch lights dotted the block, and somewhere far off, a screen door clapped shut. And then it came, a sound drifting from the direction of Lake Erie. Low at first, almost like the wind catching in a hollow log, and then rising into something else. It didn't belong to any bird or animal George had ever heard, and it carried too far across the water to be an accident. He stood there, listening until the sound died out, leaving only the faint lap of water against the shore. He'd told Laura to stay at her mother's in Youngstown, a bit of a drive, but at least it was inland. As for him, he'd be staying It was his responsibility to watch over the town of Daggerland. George stepped back inside, checked the load in his revolver, and poured himself a fresh cup of coffee. It was going to be a long night. All I ever wanted was a dog. That may be hard for some of you to believe, but it's true. Guess what my first word was? I'll give you one try, and here's the hint. It wasn't a cat. Now granted, I said doggy and not dog, but same difference. Yep, before saying mom or dad or Santa Claus or whatever it is that children say when they finally decided to move their mouths, I made it clear I was a dog person. Now here's the cruelty of it. My mother hated dogs. Wasn't her fault exactly. She'd been bitten as a kid by a golden retriever of all things. Yes, imagine Air Bud giving my poor sweet mother a lifelong terror of one of life's best creations. I asked her about it when I was older. She said it was a neglectful younger couple, left their dog outside all the time for years on a small chain tied to a tree. I can understand why I was angry. That's not any life for a dog, especially something as smart as a golden. Well, one evening Mom was walking by. Maybe it wanted company, because it snapped that leash off, ran right at her, and bit her on the ankle. She said it drew blood. Nothing terrible or anything, but it was enough to scar her for life. So anyway, you can imagine that my mom was less than thrilled by my first word. I mean, how does that even happen exactly? We didn't even have a dog. She'd never allowed dogs over. My mom couldn't figure it out. She must have racked her head good on that one. Eventually, she just defaulted to, must have left the TV on and some stupid dog movie was playing. Tell you the truth, though, I don't think that was it. I think it was something more. And I suppose that's where our story begins. Well, try as I might, I could not get Mom to let me have a dog. 3 times I tried to bring a dog home. Serious tries, at least. 7, if you count the more stupid ideas. And every time I brought one home, or tried to dog sit for a neighbor, or anything, Mom would freak out and say, absolutely not under any circumstances. And we'd stay mad at each other for exactly 24 hours. Not sure why it worked like that, but it did. Now, there are positives and negatives to childhood. Good things and bad. The good, you don't have to get a job, you don't have to worry about the stock market, and you don't have to show up to a job you hate 20 years in a row. You can play baseball outside as late as you want, go on adventures, not worry about a damn thing. But, and this is a big one, if your mom absolutely hates dogs, there is not a thing you can do about it. On May 20th, 2010, that all changed. I turned 18, and by 6 a.m., I'd packed my bags, thrown them into a rusty Ford Cavalier outside I got for $1,100, and was headed to the local animal shelter. Now, over the previous year, I had stopped by Angel's Animal Shelter no less than 19 times. I ended up getting a part-time job there, around visit number 6. Nothing glamorous, mostly cleaning cages, walking dogs, restocking food bins. Fred said if I was going to be haunting the place anyway, might as well get paid for it. So I did. I worked Saturdays and a few afternoons after school, just enough to keep gas in the Cavalier and my foot in the door. It was kind of torture though, because when I saw a dog I liked, what exactly could I do? I could just wait and wait. By now, I knew every face in the kennel, or at least I thought I did. Hey there, youngster. Fred grinned as I parked the Cavalier. Badly, I might add. Is it that time already? Man, a year flew by, huh? You kidding me? I began. This year was slow. Longest year of my life, I replied. Well, it's a good thing you're only 18 then, Fred grinned. You'll have longer years, trust me. Fred was average height, a little heavyset, looking to be going on, I think, 60. He was the owner, the manager, and janitor, and whatever else needed to be done in the place. We'd gotten along well from the start, and he knew today was going to be a challenge. Any newcomers? I asked. Fred shook his head, taking a sip of coffee from a world's best boss mug, which he most certainly got himself. Since 8 p.m. last night? No, I think not. If anyone knows this entire roster, it's you, kid. I nodded, deep in thought. Fred took out his Grateful Dead key loop, found the right one, and with a slow creak, the kennel door opened. We began our rounds. Well, Border Collie? Maybe. German Shepherd? Maybe. You know which one? Maybe. Fred chuckled. I paced, looking through each door, and just then something strange happened. I heard a new bark. There was a room at the very end of the corridor. Storage, I thought. I'd never seen any dogs kept back there. But that bark definitely came from behind it. Hey, Frank, that come from that room way back there? No. You sure? Yes. Yeah, I'm pretty sure there's another dog in that back room, Frank. He sighed, pulled out his key ring again, and walked slowly towards the back room and the sound. There's something wrong with this one, he began. He can take a look, but we gotta put him down next week. Angriest animal I have ever seen. He bites someone? I asked, as Frank fiddled with his keychain, still searching. No, nothing like that. Damn thing just showed up here last week. Stood outside in the back lot and growled something terrible at everyone who came near it. Took damn near 3 hours, but I wrangled him in here. Least it wasn't far. Frank pushed the doorway open halfway, then paused. I am serious, kid. You can take a look and see for yourself, but you ain't getting this one. Angriest animal I have ever seen, and I have seen some doozies. It don't let anyone near it, so stay back, see for yourself, and... Before Frank could finish, I'd pushed the old steel door open the rest of the way, and taken a quick step in. Kinda dark in here now. Yeah, light's busted. I'm working on it, he replied. Taking another step forward, I saw a tall cage, floor to ceiling, about 4 feet in front of me, though I couldn't see anything inside. Having no fear of dogs and being curious, I quickly stepped forward, pressing my face near the bars of the cage. Hey, don't... Fred began, but it was too late. I had made a terrible mistake. The beast had taken that opportunity to rush forward out of the darkness, leap onto the bars of the cage where my face was, and lick me. I laughed. I'll be damned, Frank muttered. The beast paced the bars inside, gently whining as it looked up at me. A note closer. Hey, don't do that, Fred continued, but he was too late. It walked closer, put its paws against the bars, and licked my face again. I placed my hand on his head, rubbed it, and we just sat for a few moments. Oh, I don't get it, but you're still not keeping this thing. Not safe. What is he? I asked. I don't know. I had to guess, I'd say part German Shepherd, part wolf. You can tell from the paws and the eyes. I continued to pet the thing. He'd laid down against the bars, put his head on the floor, and closed his eyes like he trusted me. "Look, kid, doesn't matter if for some reason he likes you. You can't take this one. He's a mess, angry as hell, and according to Ordinance Number 94, no citizen in Sheffield County can legally own a wolf." "Well, I guess we're gonna have to keep it to ourselves then," I replied. "And you don't even know for sure he's a wolf anyway." "Kid, you aren't?" "All right, Fred, give me his papers. I'll take him," I said, cutting him off again as I rubbed the dog's head. Frank looked down at the floor and said, "Your mother is gonna kill me." Now, my Uncle Todd had a small cabin down by the lake. Had been in the family for years, though I'd only been there once. It was an old, run-down place about 7 miles off the highway, but it had electricity, running water, and most importantly, I could have a dog. Todd said I could have the place as long as I liked, as long as I cleaned it up a bit, fixed a thing or two, and left it better off than when I'd found it. Fair enough, I thought. The beast, I still hadn't named him yet, sat upright in the back seat of my Cavalier, looking out at the trees and calm water of the lake as we passed. He didn't bark, didn't pant, didn't make a sound, actually. Just stared out the window in total silence. When we arrived at the cabin, it was late afternoon. I opened the car door to let him out, said, "Come on, boy," and that was that. He jumped out, licked the side of my pants, and was close by my side as I opened the trunk and got out supplies. A couple big jugs of water, just in case, a couple days worth of canned food and noodles. "I forgot dog food," I said. "I guess you're eating noodles, dude." He seemed to be okay with that. I walked up the muddy drive and stepped onto the porch of the old cabin. "All right, come on, boy," I called. But he didn't move. He'd followed me thus far, but now he stood right at the precipice of the first wooden step, and he'd go no further. He growled up at me. No, not at me. At something behind me. It took some pushing and beef jerky, but I managed to get the dog inside, though he was not happy about it. We went through the old place together. I planned to stay here over the summer, so I wanted to take inventory. As I said, the cabin hadn't been used in years, and the more I went through it, the more I realized why. It started to rain around mid-afternoon. The droplets of water bouncing off the tin roof were calming, but they came with a problem. Leaks. A lot of leaks. 5, in fact, but fortunately my Uncle Todd had left a fair share of buckets, and it was easy enough to plop one under each drip. 2 in the kitchen, 1 in the guest bedroom directly onto the bed, which looked to have about 200 years of dust on the yellowed sheets, 1 in the living area directly in front of the fireplace, and 1 in the bathroom that fortunately happened to fall directly into the sink, saving me a bucket. If you've ever lived in a leaky house, it's not a nice feeling. Comes with constant vigilance, stress, and likely mold. But you get used to it after a while. It's always annoying, but I suppose it becomes less annoying. I don't know. What I do know is that the leaks weren't critical anymore. They were contained, and that was good enough for me. With the rain came the cold, but a few dry twigs, newspapers, an old log, and a box of matches, and we were off to the races. The fireplace in the main area roared to life, and I plopped down on the couch. The dog lay down between me and the fireplace and closed his eyes like this had always been his home. "Wolf," I said suddenly. He looked up at me. "You know, I have really been overthinking this. Your name should be Wolf." He turned his giant head sideways at me in thought, and then closed his eyes and turned back to the fireplace. He seemed to agree. Wolf it is. I shook out an old blanket, set it down on the old couch near Wolf, and we both drifted off to sleep. I awoke to a low growl, and it took me a moment to get my bearings. Right. Cabin, fireplace, Wolf. A flash of lightning, and then a low rumble lit up the cabin window above the porch. Wolf got up and trotted over cautiously to peer outside. Thunder. Louder this time. "What is it?" I asked him. He looked over at me, then quickly back out towards the storm. I was glad he was here. He didn't bark, didn't whine, just kept staring through the foggy glass into the rain. Another flash of lightning, and for half a second, I thought I saw something. Not movement, not a person, just a shape. Tall, upright. And then it was gone. I stood slowly, walked toward the window, leaned over Wolf to get a better look. Nothing. Just the trees swaying and the black lake beyond. "You saw something?" I asked him. He didn't move, but his ears twitched. And that's when I heard something. A thumping sound. It wasn't thunder. It came again 5 seconds later. Heavy, dull, like something dragging a tree trunk through mud. Not fast, not frantic, just deliberate. I reached over to the kitchen counter and clicked off the lantern, letting the room fall into shadow. Another flash of lightning, and this time I saw it clearly. Something stepped between two trees, maybe 20 yards from the porch. It moved on two legs, but it wasn't a person. It was hunched, long-armed, with something hanging off its back. Looked like fur. Its face. I couldn't see a face. Just blank. Like the skin didn't fold right. Like it'd been pulled tight over something it didn't belong to. Wolf growled low. I moved to the fireplace and picked up one of the tools. It wasn't much, but it was solid, and it felt better than standing there with empty hands. I could see the creature take a step closer. I couldn't see it clearly anymore, but I heard it. Mud sucking underfoot. Something heavy brushing past low-hanging branches. And then I heard it on the porch. Wolf stood. His fur bristled down his spine. Something touched the doorknob. I tightened my grip and backed slowly toward the hallway. The knob began to turn. Left, right. And then it stopped. Silence. I held my breath. Wolf let out a low, vibrating growl, his body stiffening like a statue. And then, the front door slammed open so hard it cracked against the wall behind it. Wind burst in, flinging leaves, dirt, and rain in the cabin. And standing in the doorway, framed by lightning and the dark trees behind it, was this thing. Its head tilted sideways, like it was trying to understand what it was looking at. Wolf lunged and crashed into its legs with a snarl, driving it back onto the porch. The thing shrieked like metal shearing against glass, and they tumbled into the rain. Wolf bit into its arm, shaking with everything he had. The creature slammed him against the ground once and then twice, and Wolf yelped but didn't let go. I raised the fireplace poker, stepped into the rain, and it looked at me. It didn't have eyes. It let go of Wolf and took one step toward me. and I swung as hard as I could. It connected with a wet crack, like hitting soaked leather. The thing barely flinched. It swiped back, claws cutting through my shirt, slicing near my ribs. I stumbled back into the doorway and hit the floor hard. Wolf hit it again, this time going for the legs. It hissed, and then it was just gone. The whole thing was maybe 30 seconds. I lay there, blinking upwards, rain dripping down my face. Wolf came and sat next to me, panting, soaked, shaking. I put my hand on his back. The fire was still crackling inside, barely. I didn't speak. The fire crackled low. Rain tapped against the walls like fingers drumming in thought. Then Wolf shifted. He let out a soft grunt and tried to stand, but his back leg buckled halfway. He yelped and dropped back down, panting hard. I moved to him quickly. Easy, buddy. That leg, his rear right, was already swelling. 3 long scratches trailed down his thigh, angry and red. He hadn't let on before, hadn't made a sound. Tough dog. But now, it wasn't walking far. I looked at the door, then at the window. The rain outside had turned to a sideways sheet, streaking past in waves. Thunder rumbled again, more distant this time. All right, we're not waiting around, I said aloud, more to myself than to him. I grabbed my keys, slung on a soaked hoodie, and looked over my shoulder. All right, come on, we're getting out of here. Wolf stood slowly, limped towards the door. I opened it, helped him down the steps. The wind shoved at us, rain slapping my face so hard I could barely keep my eyes open. The car sat where I left it, half sunk into the mud and gravel. I yanked open the back door and patted the seat. Okay, in. Wolf hesitated, then climbed in awkwardly, curling against the fabric with a low whine. I slammed the door and got in the driver's side. Keys in. Deep breath. No turnover. I twisted the key again. Dash lights flickered, then died. Come on. Nothing. No engine. Just rain. I shoved the door open and popped the hood, storm punching me in the chest as I stumbled to the front. Lifted it. The engine was soaked and cold, and the wires, they were shredded. The harness had been torn apart like spaghetti, gnawed through. Not clean, not like a knife. This was claws or teeth. Shit, I whispered. The rain was getting heavier. I could barely hear my own breathing. I looked around, and nothing but black trees and water. Something had been here. Maybe it was still here. I dropped the hood, hard, got back in the car, with Wolf watching me, his breathing shallow. It's no good. We're not going anywhere, I said. I looked at his leg again. There was no way we'd make a hike in this weather. I could see barely 5 feet ahead. Slippery rock trails, flooded gullies, branches falling left and right. And I wasn't leaving him behind. That wasn't even an option. I reached over, scratched his head once, then quickly opened the door again. All right, come on, back inside. We limped together slowly to the cabin, soaked to the bone. My clothes clung cold and heavy. Wolf slipped once on the porch step, whined, but kept moving. I shut the door behind us and threw the latch. The inside felt warmer somehow. Still awful, still terrifying, but less exposed. Okay, All right, we're staying. The front door was cracked where it slammed open. I touched the frame, splintered. One hinge loose. It would barely hold another hit. So I started barricading. Old dresser, flipped and shoved against the door. Coffee table on its side. The couch dragged in from the corner. Anything heavy I could move with my own two hands got stacked, wedged, or leaned. The window was worse. Glass shattered. Frame bowed. I tore down an old cabinet door from the kitchen wall and nailed it over the hole with bent nails and a hammer I found in a drawer. Not airtight, but hopefully enough to slow something down. Thunder rolled again, closer this time. I found another blanket and tossed it over Wolf. He licked his paw, but didn't protest. I looked at the fireplace. The flames were dying. Good, I thought. Let it go dark. Let it think we'd left. I sank to the floor next to him, back against the couch. My breath came slow, controlled. I could hear the wind press against the outside walls, hear the trees groaning in the storm. Every now and then, I thought I heard a footstep. Hopefully that was just the house settling. But maybe not. I didn't say anything else. We just waited. The storm raged against the walls like it wanted in. Wind pushed and howled through the gaps in the window frame, slapping rain sideways into the boards I'd hastily nailed up. The fire was down to embers. I left it that way. No need to advertise we were still in here. Wolf lay beside me, one leg tucked awkwardly under him, chest rising and falling in steady, shallow breaths. Every so often, his ears twitched, and his eyes flicked toward the walls. He wasn't sleeping tonight. Neither was I. And then came a new sound. Not thunder, not wind. Scraping. I froze. Wolf's head shot up. It was coming from the back of the cabin, low, dragging, just beneath the floorboards. The crawl space. Shit, I whispered. I stood slowly and crossed to the kitchen. Wolf tried to follow, but stumbled. I motioned him to stay. The sound continued, deliberate and slow. The back of the cabin had an old cellar-style trap hatch, led to the crawl space. I hadn't thought to check it earlier. I didn't even know if it was still latched. Apparently, the thing did. I stepped into the narrow hallway that led to the back door. The sound was louder here, right beneath my boots. My breath fogged in front of me. Another scrape, then a creak, wood flexing. I bolted to the end of the hall, threw open the narrow supply closet, and found the cellar latch inside. It was shifting. The hook lock, rusted and old, was bending outward. Something was pushing up from beneath. I slammed the closet shut, shoved my back against it, and screamed for Wolf. He limped into view just as I spotted a hammer and a box of nails on the counter. I grabbed both and drove 2 nails straight through the door frame and into the closet. And then the noise stopped. Silence. Just the sound of our breathing. And then headlights. Blue and red. I blinked hard, heart still racing. A cop car was pulling slowly up the muddy road, tires hissing through puddles. Its spotlight hit the front of the cabin, lighting up the entire porch in harsh white glare. Wolf growled. not as deep as before. More confused. I moved to the front window, careful not to step in the broken glass, and peeked through a crack in the boards. The cruiser rolled to a stop, and the driver's door opened. A man stepped out, mid-50s, stocky, one hand resting on his duty belt. He squinted at the cabin and pulled up his collar against the rain. "Hey, anyone in there?" he called. I looked at Wolf. He stared at me like he knew better. I opened the door anyway. "Hey," I called, "don't come closer." The cop froze on the porch, hand moving instinctively to his sidearm. "Excuse me?" I live here. My uncle owns this place. Listen, there's something out there. You need to get back in your car and... All right. Look, this property's been listed vacant for years, kid. I know. Look, I can explain this later, okay? Right now, we need to go. There's something out here. It's not a person, okay? It's not... His expression shifted, eyes narrowing. He took a slow step forward. You say there's something out here? And then, in the flash of a lightning bolt, it was behind him. The creature stepped out of the woods like it'd been waiting for the cue. No growl, no screech, just fast. Its long arms reached around the cop's shoulders before he could even turn. "Behind you," I said. But it was too late. It twisted. The cop's head turned too far, too fast, until it detached completely with a snap, and it thudded against the wet grass. I screamed. Wolf barked sharply behind me. The creature dropped the body like trash and raised its head, that blank, eyeless face locking onto me. I slammed the door and drove the last 2 nails I had into the frame with shaking hands. Wolf limped beside me, fur standing on end, growling low and constant. Outside, the radio from the cruiser crackled to life.
"Unit 12, come in."
A wet, dragging sound passed across the porch. Then silence. Wolf and I backed away from the door, side by side, until our backs hit the far wall. The flashing lights still painted the walls in red and blue, but there was no one left inside that car. The radio kept crackling.
"Unit 12, are you there?"
Static.
"Confirm status, copy."
I stood frozen, backed in the door. Wolf was beside me, growling low. The cabin felt too small now, too quiet. The kind of quiet that comes right before something bad happens. But there was one chance. The cruiser was still there. Lights still flashing, engine still running. I looked over at Wolf. He looked back, chest still heaving. Hurt, but he was alert. He was waiting for my move. I didn't speak. I just moved fast. I ripped the couch aside, shoved the dresser back just enough to squeeze through, and flung the door open. Rain poured in instantly, cold and blinding. But there was no sign of a thing. The porch was empty. The trees beyond were still. Okay, let's go. Wolf limped after me and down the steps, his good legs doing most of the work. I half ran, half slid through the mud toward the cruiser. Halfway there, I looked left. Movement. The creature was circling the house, slow and hunched, dragging its claws through the dirt like it was drawing something. It saw me, and then it charged. I yanked the cruiser door open and threw myself inside. The keys were still in. Engine purring. The moment I hit the seat, I slammed the lock button. Come on, come on. I reached over and opened the passenger door. Wolf scrambled in, whimpering, and collapsed on the seat. The thing hit the hood hard. Its body cracked the windshield, claws slamming against the glass. I could see its face now, eyeless, wet. It crawled halfway up the roof, thudding as it went. I slammed it into reverse and hit the gas. The cruiser peeled backward, tires splitting mud and gravel. The creature slipped off the roof and rolled to the ground in front of the porch. And I shifted into drive. And then I floored it. The car roared forward, and just as the thing started to rise, we hit it head on. It rolled over the roof with a deep thump, then vanished behind us in the side mirror. I didn't stop. Didn't look back. The road was a blur of trees and mud. Branches slapped the windshield. The car fishtailed on a tight curve, but I held steady. Wolf was panting beside me, bleeding on the seat, his eyes locked on the road ahead. The rain finally started to break. The sky lightened just a little. Not dawn, but less dark. I didn't speak. I just drove. And behind us, somewhere deep in those woods, something screamed. Not like a person. Not like any animal I'd ever heard. Just one long, violent wail that rose and broke apart in the trees. We drove straight to the nearest sheriff's station. Took almost an hour. I was soaked, bleeding, half in shock. Wolf was curled up, silent the whole way. When we got there, I told him everything. Well, almost everything. They asked about the cruiser, the blood, the missing deputy. I gave them what I could. They looked at me like I was nuts, but they still sent 3 cars out to that cabin. They found the house, the broken window, the claw marks on the door. They even found drag marks near the porch. But they didn't find the cop's body. Not a single trace of him. They questioned me for hours. And then they just let me go. Told me to stay close and call if I remembered anything. I didn't. I didn't go back to the cabin. I never will. But I think about it sometimes. About that night. About whatever that was out there in the storm. And about Wolf. He's still here. He's older now. Still limp sometimes. But he sleeps beside my bed. And whenever thunder rolls in, he gets up, faces the window, and looks out into the storm like he's waiting for something. Missing persons cases are different in a place like Daggerland. In Westlake or even North Olmsted, a kid goes missing and there's helicopters, news crews, half the city looking. Here, you had a couple deputies, some volunteers, and whatever neighbors are still willing to tromp through the woods with a flashlight after dark. Most times, they don't find much. The thing is, these cases are almost worse than murders. With a murder, at least there's an answer. A body, a suspect, something that closes the loop. A missing person leaves nothing but an empty space. No proof of death, no proof of life, just the gnawing thought that maybe they're still out there. In a town like this, that uncertainty spreads like a layer of underlying rot. Jenny Harper had been at the town meeting that evening, sitting stiff-backed in the folding chair while Sheriff George Lost laid down the rules. No going near the lake after dark. No walking alone along the shoreline. No children near the water. If you see something strange, call the sheriff immediately. He didn't sugarcoat it. There was something out there. She'd come home with those words burned into her brain, repeating them to herself like a talisman, as she locked up the bakery, again as she drove home, and again as she walked through the front door. Now at home in her kitchen, she recited the sheriff's rules word for word while she wiped down already clean counters. No lake road after sundown, she said, scrubbing a spot that wasn't there. No water past your knees. If you hear something calling your name, don't answer. Daniel Harper leaned on the doorway, arms crossed. He'd heard it all 3 times already. Jenny, he said, the kids aren't going near the lake. We got school, work, life. Look, baby, we don't need to turn this into some kind of... The sheriff is not a hysterical man, she cut in. If he wants to lock up the town, it's because he's seen something. You weren't at the meeting. You didn't see his face. Look, Daniel began. What I see is you going overboard. Locks are fine, honey. Rules are fine, but you're talking like... I want us out of here, she said suddenly. Just for a few days. We can go to my mom's in Cleveland. We can take the kids and... we can stay there until things calm down. Daniel frowned at that. That's almost a 2-hour drive at night. It's safer than staying here, she replied. Her eyes flicked toward Tyler and Megan at the table, silently eating their dinner. Tyler looked up at the word safer, but Megan kept her head down, fingers wrapped tightly around her fork. Jenny noticed the fork. She noticed everything. A cabinet door left ajar, the way the salt shaker had been moved 2 inches from where she'd left it. The crumbs that clung to the cutting board, no matter how many times she wiped it. Once she spotted something out of place, she couldn't let it go, not until it was fixed. Daniel had lost count of the number of times she'd stopped mid-conversation to straighten a picture frame or refold a dish towel. It wasn't just neatness. It was her way of keeping her fears under control. When the world got messy, when things happened that you couldn't explain or stop, she doubled down on the things she could. A crooked lampshade might get 3 separate adjustments before she was satisfied. She'd check the locks, then check them again, then run her fingers over the deadbolt just to feel it was right. That same restlessness was in her voice now. Daniel hesitated. Then he nodded. He knew his wife and he loved her, but Daniel understood that she wouldn't stop worrying until they left. Okay, honey, okay. We'll pack up and go. Jenny moved fast, because moving fast kept her from thinking too much. She made piles on the bed, 1 per person, shirts folded the same way, socks nested heel to toe, toothbrushes zipped into clear bags. She wrote a list on the back of a bakery receipt. Chargers, inhaler, snacks, water, cash. Underneath, she wrote the sheriff's exact rules in cramped block letters and tore the receipt free. Taking her first load out to the car, she taped it to the dash with a strip of blue painter's tape from the junk drawer. Her son Tyler stuffed a flashlight and his monster book into his backpack. He hovered in the doorway, half excited, half pretending he wasn't. Are we really going to Grandma's? For a few days, Jenny said. Shoes on, come on, hoodie. Her daughter Megan padded down the hall, hugging a stuffed rabbit with one flattened ear. Does Grandma have nightlights? she asked. "She does now," Jenny said, smiling, and dropped 2 plug-ins into the bag. Daniel did a pass for cables in his laptop. He glanced at the answering machine with 2 red blips and hit play. Mendez's voice from the station, asking folks to respect the curfew. Another from a neighbor saying the meeting got pretty serious. He deleted both and grabbed the car keys. At the door, Jenny set her palm on the deadbolt, pressed, counted to 4. She tugged the handle twice, breathed, then tugged it a 3rd time. Daniel could have teased her, but he didn't. He opened the garage instead. They finished loading the SUV. Jenny buckled Megan, then checked the buckle, then slid the strap flat because twists meant bruises. She did the same for Tyler, ignoring his eye roll. Daniel started the engine, and they rolled out slowly, tires thumping quietly on the seam at the end of the driveway, and hummed away into the night. The headlights washed over the neighborhood as they drove. They took a right at the main road and made it a half-mile before stopping at the temporary sign someone from the county had bolted onto a post. Lake Road closed after dusk by order of the sheriff. The metal looked fresh, the letters stark. They didn't have a choice. This was the only way out to I-90 West into Cleveland. "Windows up," Jenny said, her eyes fixed straight ahead. "We don't stop for anything." She took her husband's hand as they slowly pulled past the sign and onto Lake Road. Houses thinned, replaced by long stretches of scrub and the occasional dock lane arrowing toward the dark water. Far out, a buoy bell clanged once, a lonely sound carried up by a wind that smelled faintly metallic. Daniel watched Jenny's profile, how she scanned the shoulder, then the mirror, then the dash like a pilot before takeoff. The painter's tape with the sheriff's rules fluttered whenever the vents clicked on. Lake Road was narrow here, hemmed in by brush on the left and the steep drop to the water on the right. Guardrails ran in broken segments, their reflectors catching the headlights in quick white blinks. Between them, the lake showed through, black and endless, its surface rippling just enough to break up the moon's reflection. Every so often, the beam swept over a dock lane, plunging toward the water. Most were chained off, but a few stood open, the gravel shining faintly in the low light. Daniel kept his eyes forward, hands steady on the wheel, but Jenny noticed how his jaw shifted every time one came up. The road felt quieter than it should have. Even the tires seemed muted. Somewhere out on the lake, the buoy bell gave a single hollow clang. In the back seat, Tyler leaned forward, eyes bright. "Josh said he saw a monster in the water. A real monster." His tone a mix of excitement and disbelief, like he wanted it to be true. Daniel grinned without taking his eyes off the road. "There's no monsters, Tyler." He let the pause stretch. "Except if you count Grandma." Tyler snorted. Megan giggled into a rabbit. Daniel leaned over just far enough to kiss Jenny on the cheek. "I'm kidding, honey. You know I love your mother." Jenny shook her head, but didn't hide her smile. "Uh-huh." They rounded the next bend, and that was when the headlights flickered, once, then again, before the dash lights dimmed and the SUV gave a low, shuddering cough. Daniel's eyes darted to the gauges. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me." The engine sputtered, caught for half a second, then died completely. The power steering went with it, forcing Daniel to muscle the wheel as the SUV coasted forward in silence. The only sound now was the faint hiss of the tires on asphalt. Jenny's smile was gone. "What is it?" "I don't know, honey. Battery, fuel pump, I don't know," Daniel said, guiding them toward the shoulder. He braked, and the SUV rolled to a stop beside a section of guardrail, Beyond it, the slope dropped steeply into a tangle of brush and black water. The moon shimmered faintly on the lake's surface below. Daniel set the shifter in park, killed the lights, and exhaled. "Stay here, I'll check under the hood." Jenny unbuckled halfway. "Call the sheriff first." "I will, honey, I will," he said, already reaching for his phone as he pushed the door open. Cold air slid in immediately, smelling sharper this close to the water. Daniel's boots scuffed the pavement as he walked around to the front. He popped the hood. The hinges gave a dry squeal. Jenny rebuckled, glanced back at the kids. "You both stay strapped in." Tyler was craning his neck to see past her shoulder, but Megan had sunk low, rabbit pressed close to her face. Jenny reached back, squeezed her knee, then pulled her own phone out. No bars. Outside, Daniel angled his body away from the windshield, the phone cupped to his ear. He nodded at something, kicked at the gravel, then disappeared a little farther up the shoulder. Jenny tried to see him through the side mirror, but the angle just caught the glare of their own taillights bouncing off the guardrail. She tapped her thumb on the wheel, eyes flicking between the mirror and the kids. The seconds drew out. The lake breathed against the rocks somewhere below, a slow sucking sound like water pulling at weeds. Once, a faint splash carried up, too big for a fish, too quick for a wave. Jenny told herself it was nothing. A pair of headlights swept around the far bend behind them, far enough away that they looked like two pinpricks moving through the trees. The glow grew, sliding across the inside of the SUV like a slow searchlight. Jenny sat up a little, thinking maybe it would stop. The beams climbed the curve of the guardrail, spilling silver over the hood. For a moment, the interior of the car felt warmer, safer, simply because another human being was out there in the dark with them. And then the light shifted. The vehicle behind them drifted toward the center line, its high beams momentarily bleaching the inside of the SUV so bright Jenny had to blink. She caught the profile of the driver, or thought she did, but it was gone too fast to be certain. The tires hissed past without slowing, the receding glow washing over the curve ahead before vanishing completely. And just like that, they were alone again. The darkness didn't just come back. It seemed to fold over them, thicker than before. The only light left was the anemic glow from the dash and the pale silver of the moon on the lake below. Jenny listened for the sound of the other car, an engine, anything. But all she heard was the faint slap of the water against rocks. She glanced at the clock on the dash. A little after midnight. Daniel had been outside for what, 3, 4 minutes? She thought about getting out, but her stomach tightened at the idea of standing on that shoulder with a lake yawning beside her. The driver's door opened again, and Daniel leaned in. "All right, well, Marcus is on his way." Jenny blinked at that. "Marcus?" Yeah, he's closer than the sheriff, you know. He can be here in 15, Daniel replied, before quickly shutting the door before she could argue, and going back to the hood. Jenny stared out in shock. Her husband had not called the sheriff. Jenny sat there for a beat, pulse ticking in her ears. Then she unbuckled, shoved the door open, and stepped out into the cold. The slam echoed along the guardrail and out toward the water. Daniel straightened from the engine bay, his expression already bracing for it. "Jenny, you called Marcus?" she interrupted, striding toward him. "We're stuck on Lake Road in the middle of the night, and you call a mechanic instead of the sheriff." "Jenny, he's closer, okay? He can tow us out faster." "That's not the point," she replied. She was pacing now, hands tied at her sides. The sheriff knows what's been happening out here. He knows what's in that lake. Daniel rubbed a hand over his jaw. Oh my God, honey. And what's he gonna do? Show up with a net? If something's out there, George Lost isn't gonna save us any faster than Marcus can. She turned on him, eyes sharp. You weren't at the meeting? You didn't see his face? The wind came in off the lake, bringing that wet metal smell again. Jenny walked a few paces toward the guardrail, then back toward the SUV, her boots crunching on grit. Jenny, Daniel warned, glancing toward the kids through the windshield. You're scaring them. I'm not the one, she started. But the rest never came. Something dark shot across the road, so fast it barely had shape. Just motion and weight, and the sickening thud of impact. Jenny's body jerked sideways and was gone, yanked off her feet and into the blackness beyond the guardrail before Daniel could even shout. One heartbeat she was there, pacing in the beam of the headlights. The next, there was nothing but the sound of gravel skittering over the edge and the faint slap of water below. Jenny? Daniel's voice cracked. He ran toward the rail, heart hammering, trying to make sense of what he'd just seen. But the space where she'd been was empty, headlights burning on nothing, the cold air swallowing his breath. From the SUV, the little girl started to scream. Daniel spun toward them, caught their wide, tear-filled eyes in the headlights' glare, then vaulted the guardrail without thinking. His boots hit the loose gravel on the far side, sliding a half step before he caught himself and started down the slope. It was steeper than it looked. The ground gave way under his heels, clumps of frozen dirt and stones tumbling toward the water. He used one hand to brace against the brush, the other out in front, ready to grab her if he saw her. Jenny! His voice came back to him smaller than he expected, swallowed by the cold air. The lake was a dark mirror at the bottom, the moonlight wavering across its surface. He scanned the shoreline for movement, a ripple, a shadow, anything. But it was just black water breathing against the rocks. Another few yards down, and the smell hit him. Sharp. Wet. It clung to the back of his throat. His breath puffed in quick bursts as he kept moving, the sound of the kids crying fading behind him. Then, from somewhere just out of sight to his left, came the faintest splash. Not the lazy slap of water against stone, but a clean, deliberate drop. Daniel froze, every muscle tight. Jenny? No answer. Just the water and the wind. He took another cautious step toward the sound, his boots crunching against the gravel. Moonlight caught movement ahead. A shape, low to the ground, its outline broken and hunched. For a heartbeat, Daniel's brain refused to process what he was seeing. Then it shifted, and he saw the trail. A dark smear glistened on the pale stones, leading from the base of the slope to the water's edge. His eyes followed it, and the air seemed to drain out of his lungs. Jenny lay face down at the end of it, her arms limp, her hair dragging in the sand. Something was dragging her. Its claws were sunk deep into her calves, hooked through denim and skin, and it moved in a strange, halting shamble. It moved deliberately, without haste, like it'd done this many times before. Each lurch dragged her another foot toward the lake, the tip of her shoes leaving shallow furrows in the wet gravel. The thing kept dragging her until the black water lapped at her knees, never looking back, never loosening its grip. Daniel thought for a strange, disjointed moment that there was something almost playful in the way it moved. It wasn't just hauling her, it was savoring it. The sway of its shoulders, the little hitch before each step. It made it look like it was keeping time to music. A memory surfaced, uninvited. A reality show he'd caught on TV a few nights back, where a couple was doing the tango. That same deliberate, side-to-side rhythm, the controlled steps, the flourish at the end. This thing was doing that, but with his wife's blood trailing behind it. Daniel's mind flicked between disbelief and rage, but his body was already moving. His hand went to his pocket, fingers closing around the slim handle of his pocket knife. He snapped the blade open without looking, the metallic click sounding small against the water's hush. "Hey," he called. That was all he could think to say. The thing stopped mid-step. Its head swiveled toward him in one slow, fluid motion. Moonlight caught its face, and there it was. Teeth too long, a grin too wide, as if the sight of Daniel was funny. Terror surged cold through Daniel's chest, but he was already moving, splashing into the shallows. The lake swallowed his boots in a single step, then the water was at his thighs, then his waist. He kicked off the bottom and swam hard, eyes locked on Jenny's still form as the ripples closed over her. The creature didn't move. It just waited. Inside the SUV, Tyler and Megan sat frozen in their seats. The headlights still burned down the empty stretch of road ahead, but it felt darker somehow, as if the light didn't reach as far as it should. Megan sniffled, clutching her rabbit so tightly her knuckles went white. "Where's Mom and Dad?" she whispered. Tyler shook his head. He didn't want to answer because he didn't know, and because saying it out loud might make it real. The car was too quiet. The only sound was the faint tick of the cooling engine and their own breathing. Every so often, a gust of wind rattled the branches along the slope, and Megan would flinch. Tyler gripped his flashlight tighter, angling it toward the floorboard so its glow didn't spill onto the windows. He kept telling himself not to look toward the water. Megan sniffled again. "I don't like it here." Neither of them moved. Then, under the soft rhythm of the waves, came another sound. Low at first, almost like distant thunder. It grew, a steady, throaty rumble rolling over the curve of the road. Tyler's eyes shot to the rearview mirror, but the darkness there stayed unbroken. The noise swelled, joined by the faint crunch of tires on gravel. Headlights crested the bend behind them, washing through the SUV's interior like daylight. Megan let out a shaky breath. It was a pickup truck. The truck's engine idled low, filling the silence with a heavy hum. Its headlights stretched long across the guardrail, cutting sharp shadows into the slope. Megan pressed closer to Tyler, clutching her rabbit to her chin. Her eyes stayed locked on the rear window until a shape moved across the beams. A man stepped in the light, his limp pronounced as he came forward. His coat hung heavy around his shoulders, and in his hand a small toolbox clinked with every uneven step. Marcus Wilkins, the town mechanic. Marcus looked older than his years, though no one could quite pin down how old he actually was. Thin but wiry, his frame had the kind of strength that came from decades of lifting car parts and tires rather than gym weights. His shoulders carried a permanent stoop. and he favored his left leg with a subtle limp that made his gait uneven. His hands told the story most clearly, bent at the knuckles, stiff with arthritis, yet still strong enough to wrench a bolt free when no one else could. Grease was embedded so deep into his skin that it never fully washed out. Even his fingernails carried permanent stains, like shadows he couldn't scrub away. His face was sunken but sharp, with hollow cheeks and eyes that seemed both weary and alert at the same time. His thinning hair, once black, was now almost completely gray, and he wore it cropped short to keep it out of his work. Despite the wear, there was a steadiness about him. A man who knew every rattle and cough of his customers' cars, and who carried that knowledge like armor. He'd lost his wife the previous spring, brain cancer taking her slowly. Since then, Marcus had driven his old truck more, always on the lookout for work to keep himself busy. His only son, Tommy, lived out on the Pennsylvania coast, visiting maybe once a year. Marcus didn't hold it against him. His son had his own family, his own life. But that did mean the shop was quieter than it used to be, and Marcus filled the silence the only way he knew how, with work. And not just paying work. Somewhere along the line, kids in town had figured out that if your bike chain snapped or your handlebars wouldn't straighten, Marcus was the one who could fix it. No charge, no lecture, just a nod, a few turns of a wrench, and the thing was working better than new. Word got around, and before long it became something of a ritual. A bent frame or broken pedal meant a trip to Marcus's shop. He'd even fixed up little Tyler Harper's bike last year. The boy probably didn't even remember. It was just one of those small-town miracles kids take for granted. But Marcus remembered. He remembered every chain he'd set back on its sprocket, every wheel he'd trued. And the very same man who'd once mended what Tyler thought was an impossibly broken bicycle was about to save his life. Marcus stopped at the side of the SUV, bending to peer through the glass. His face was tired, worn by years of hard work and long winters, but steady in a way that made Tyler's chest loosen just a little. "You kids all right in there?" His voice was muffled through the glass, but calm, normal, like this was just another breakdown on just another night. "Where's Mom and Dad?" Megan's voice wavered before Tyler could answer. There's a monster," she blurted. Too fast, like if she didn't get it out, she'd choke on it. Her small hands clutched at her brother's sleeve. "It took Mom." The words hit the glass, muffled, broken by her trembling breath. To Marcus, it was like hearing through a storm window, half-swallowed syllables, jagged with panic. He caught only fragments. Monster. Mom. He leaned closer, cupping a hand around his ear against the glass. "Say again?" His voice was steady, though his heart thumped a bit harder in his chest. Tyler shook his head violently, pulling Megan closer, like the very air outside might grab her. Marcus raised a palm, slow and calm, then motioned to the lock with 2 fingers. "All right, come on. It's okay," he said. "Open up now." For a long moment, nothing moved inside. Just 2 pale faces staring back, eyes wide, chest heaving. Then, with a tiny metallic click, the lock slid. Marcus eased the door open before they could change their minds. "All right, come on," he murmured, helping Megan down first, then Tyler. His big hands steadying them both, as if they were made of glass. He guided them toward his truck, his body angled between them and the darkness at the tree line. "All right, get in now," he said. "You're safe. I'll take care of you." He got them into the back seat of his truck, closing the door with a gentle but firm click. Megan clutched Tyler's arm so tightly her knuckles whitened. Both of them pressed together in the dark cab like they thought the glass might shatter in any second. Marcus gave them a steady nod, a half smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, before circling around to the driver's side. He slid behind the wheel, fished the radio handset off its clip, and thumbed the button. "Hey, Sheriff's Office, this is Marcus Wilkins out on Old Lake Road. I got 2 kids here, scared out of their minds. Something happened. I need somebody out here soon as possible." A burst of static, then a woman's voice crackled back through the line.
"Marcus, this is Mendez. Sit tight and I'll get a unit to you right away. Where exactly are you?"
"Well, we're a couple miles past Palmer's Bluff," he began, his eyes flicking to the side mirror, scanning the tree line. "Pulled over by a black SUV. Kids were inside. Their parents..." He paused, realizing that the kids were listening. "Well, we just need help right away," he finished. There was the briefest pause before Mendez came back, her tone sharper now.
"Copy that. Stay put, Marcus. Sending someone out now."
Marcus let the handset rest in his lap, staring out into the darkness beyond his headlights. His gut twisted. The kids were safe for the moment, but the night out here felt wrong. He took a slow breath, then glanced back at the 2 small faces peering over the seat, eyes wide and waiting. "You 2 just sit tight," he said, voice softer. "Help's on the way." He leaned a little closer over the seat. "Tell me what happened." Tyler opened his mouth, then shut it again. His eyes darted to Megan, who clutched her rabbit tight. Finally, he said, "Something took them." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Took them where?" "To the water," Megan whispered. He reached over to the passenger seat, fingers closing around the long-handled wrench lying there. The weight was solid, familiar. He slid out of the cab, boots crunching gravel, and glanced back at the kids. "Don't open these doors," he said firmly, "unless it's me or the sheriff." He hesitated a beat, thinking of the children, and then added, "You know, when I get scared, I squeeze my hand into a fist. Reminds me I'm still here." He gave them the faintest wink and shut the door behind him. Marcus limped toward the guardrail, the wrench loose but ready in his hand. He stopped at the edge, where the headlights bled pale light across the brush, and leaned over. Down below, the beach glistened in strips of moonlight, the lake lapping slow and steady against the stones. He squinted, searching the shoreline. Marcus narrowed his eyes. Something was lying there, a pale shape against the darker gravel. For a moment, he thought it might just be driftwood. But then he saw an arm, a body. He glanced back in the direction of the tow truck. 2 small faces pressed to the glass, waiting. Marcus lifted the wrench in a little half wave, stay put, and swung one leg over the guardrail. His boot slipped on the gravel slope, but he caught himself and began working his way down toward the shoreline, slow and careful, the wrench still gripped tight. The air grew colder the closer he got to the lake. The sound of the waves slowly lapping against the rocks was all he could hear now. At the bottom, the stones crunched underfoot, The body lay sprawled at the edge of the tide, hair dark and wet, limbs at odd angles. Marcus approached, his limp pronounced in the shifting gravel. "Hello?" he called softly, though he already knew there'd be no answer. The figure didn't move. He crouched, bracing himself on the wrench, and in the moonlight he saw the face of a woman. Tall, maybe 5'8", he figured, with dark hair plastered across her cheek, her eyes half open and clouded. Marcus's gut tightened. He swallowed hard, forcing himself closer. Her blouse was torn open across the torso, the fabric soaked through and clinging to the skin beneath. At first, it looked like some dark bruise spreading across her right side, until he realized it wasn't bruising at all. It was absence. The flesh beneath her ribs had been ripped open, the cavity raw and hollow. There was no blood pooling, no frantic bleeding the way an injury should have looked. Just a gaping, ragged space where something had been carved out. Inside the tow truck, Tyler and Megan waited in silence. The dome light had clicked off, leaving them lit only by the faint green glow of the dash and the wash of headlights cutting into the night. Megan clutched her rabbit so tight her knuckles ached. Tyler stared straight ahead, trying to keep his breath steady, trying not to think about how long Marcus had been gone. And then a thump, heavy, deliberate, somewhere outside in the gravel. Both of them froze. Another thump, closer this time. Footsteps. Big ones. Megan's eyes widened. "It's him," she whispered, voice thin with hope. "It's the man that helped us." Tyler wanted to believe it. He craned his neck toward the side window. "Yeah, it's just him. Has to be." But when they turned, all they saw was darkness beyond the glass. Something stood there, close enough that its bulk blotted out the reflection of the trees. They couldn't see its face. It was too tall, the top half hidden in shadow above the window line. Only its outline was visible, a slanted shoulder, the rise and fall of something breathing slow and steady. Tyler's heart hammered in his chest. Megan shrank back, her rabbit pulled up beneath her chin. A hand moved. No, not a hand. Longer. A claw. It slid slowly across the glass with a wet, dragging sound. The smear it left behind was dark, streaking through the fogged surface in slow strokes. One line, another, then another looping back around. The kids watched in horror as letters began to form. Their breath fogged the inside, while the thing smeared from the outside. The letters crooked, but unmistakable. It read, "Hello." Megan whimpered, a high, choked sound. But before Tyler could shush her, the figure shifted. The weight outside pressed forward. In an instant, the window was filled, face mashed flat against the glass, grin wide. The eyes rolled and locked onto theirs. It held up something red towards the kids, something dripping, and took a big, happy bite of it. Tyler didn't realize it then, but he was staring at a human liver. The thing winked. Megan gasped and dove for the middle of the seat, her rabbit squeezed against her chest. Tyler forced himself to tear his eyes from the window. His hand shot to the door handle, pressing down on the lock to make sure it was still tight. "Check yours," he said quickly. Megan's fingers trembled, but she shoved the knob down until it clicked hard. She nodded, eyes wide, breathing fast. For a moment, the cab was silent. Outside, the creature was still, and then it leaned back, grinned, and tilted its head toward the handle. Slowly, it lowered one long claw until it tapped against the keyhole, like it was testing the shape. And then the claw slid inside. The sound was worse than they imagined. A scraping, scratching whine that made Megan clap her hands over her ears. Tyler bit his lip, frozen, watching the thing's shoulders shift as it probed with exaggerated care, twisting the claw as if it were a skeleton key. The creature pressed its face closer to the glass, eyes rolling toward them, grin widening as it worked. It was enjoying this. There was a scraping sound, and then, click. The lock popped up with a tiny sound. The claw lingered there for a moment, savoring it, and then it slid up to the handle, curling slow and deliberate around the chrome. The door trembled as the latch began to ease back. The gap opened no more than an inch, and then, crack. A blur of iron smashed across the creature's head, just below its left eye. The blow rang out sharp against bone. The thing reeled sideways with a wet grunt, teeth snapping together as its grin finally broke. The kids flinched at the noise. Megan began screaming before she even realized what she was looking at. A figure stood just outside the headlights, bent slightly, chest heaving, both hands locked around the long wrench slick with lake spray. Marcus. He didn't say a word. His face was pale, eyes locked and burning, as if he hadn't climbed back up from the shoreline at all, but risen out of the earth for this one moment. Marcus lifted the wrench again, high and tight against his shoulder, knuckles wide. His bad leg trembled beneath him, but he didn't step back. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The creature straightened slowly, its hunched frame unfurling under the wash of the headlights until it seemed too tall, too broad to be standing on the narrow strip of road. Water dripped from its shoulders, pattering softly against the asphalt. Marcus held his ground and stood between the creature and the children, wrench raised, chest rising and falling, jaw tight as stone. They faced each other in the pale light, two silhouettes locked in a standoff, an old man with a bad leg, hard years etched into his hands, staring down a thing straight from a nightmare. For a moment, Marcus's mind slid 50-some years back. He was a boy again, sitting on the parson's old plaid couch with his friend Billy, a bowl of popcorn between them. Creature from the Black Lagoon flickered on the TV, black and white images casting long shadows across the room. He pretended to be tough, but the truth was it scared him so badly he wouldn't go near the lake for weeks. Every ripple in the water looked like claws reaching up from the deep. Billy had teased him without mercy, but Marcus never forgot the feeling. And now, here it was again. Only worse. Much worse. The rubber-suited monster from his childhood nightmares had nothing on the thing grinning at him under the Ohio moonlight. The night was silent, except for the steady hush of the lake below, each wave sliding against the rocks like the beat of a low drum. It was their music. The thing tilted its head and dragged one long claw against the metal door of the truck. The screech of steel on steel split the air. Sparks jumped. Marcus didn't wait. He'd never been more scared in all his life, but he shifted his grip, squared his shoulders, and swung. The wrench came down hard, a blur in the half-light, and the creature caught his arm mid-swing. Its claw clamped around his wrist, the strike frozen in place, inches from its skull. For a heartbeat, the thing's eyes narrowed, as if surprised by the strength of the old man. Marcus gritted his teeth and shoved back, every muscle in his shoulders and chest straining. Decades of turning wrenches, prying rusted bolts, hauling engines off mounts. It had built a kind of stubborn strength into him. His forearms bulged, the tendons standing out like cords as he pushed against the thing. And for just that moment, he held his own. But strong as he was no match for a creature from nightmares. The grin slid back into place as it leaned closer. Slowly, deliberately, it rolled Marcus's wrist inward, bending the wrench back toward his own shoulder. His arm trembled, locked in place, pain shooting down into his elbow. Then the creature reached forward, one claw traced across his collarbone, then up the side of his neck. Marcus tried to jerk away, but the claw twitched. A sharp sting blossomed under his jaw. Warmth spilled down the left side of his neck, hot and sudden. He staggered backward, dropping the wrench and gripping his neck tightly. Inside the cab, Tyler and Megan pressed against the glass, eyes wide. Blood poured down Marcus's neck, bright and gleaming in the headlights. He staggered backward into their view, clutching at the wound with both hands. For a brief, awful moment, he turned toward the truck. His eyes found theirs through the windshield, wide, stricken, apologetic, as though he wished he could tell the children to run. His knees buckled. Marcus Wilkins crumpled to the asphalt in front of the hood, collapsing hard onto his side. Blood spread beneath him in a slick, slow-growing pool that caught the beams of the headlights and glistened like oil. Megan let out a thin wail, muffled by the glass. Tyler just stared in shock. Beyond Marcus's still form, the creature's shadow loomed, hunched and grinning, stepping forward into the wash of light. The creature turned and slowly came towards the children. Its claws curled around the door handle. Megan sobbed into a rabbit. Tyler, too frozen even to move. The door began to slowly open, and then headlights flared. An engine roared. A car slammed into the creature with bone-cracking force, the impact hurling it sideways off its feet. The thing spun across the asphalt, skidding in a blur of claws and blood before crashing hard into the guardrail with a shriek of metal. The cruiser skidded to a stop, tires screaming. Red and blue lights erupted, painting the road in frantic color. The kids blinked against the sudden blaze, hearts hammering. A man stepped out of the cruiser, dark hair beneath a sheriff's hat, brown eyes locked hard on the thing sprawled against the guardrail. His revolver was already up, steady in both hands, barrel tracking the creature as it pushed against the twisted metal. Sheriff George Lost. From the same vehicle, another man bolted forward, blondish hair showing under the brim of a baseball cap, green eyes sharp with urgency. He didn't hesitate. He went straight for the truck, straight for the kids. "Get down," he barked. Tyler shoved Megan against the seat as David Winters yanked the door open with a grunt. Behind him, George's revolver cracked. Once, twice. The creature jerked with each shot, a spray of black fluid hitting the guardrail. It still tried to rise up. George fired again. Then he holstered his revolver long enough to pull open the cruiser's back door. "Come on," he barked, waving the kids forward. David half lifted, half shoved Tyler and Megan out of the truck and across the narrow stretch of road. Megan clung to his sleeve, rabbit dangling from her arm, while Tyler stumbled ahead, pale and numb with shock. George caught them both, steadying their shoulders, and guided them into the back seat of the cruiser. "Get down, stay down," he ordered, his voice sharp but not unkind. The kids slid across the seat, clutching each other tight as the red and blue lights washed their faces. George slammed the door shut, turned back, and called over the roof, "Dave!" David was already moving, but he stopped when George's hand shot out, pointing. Marcus. He lay sprawled in front of the tow truck, blood slick and pooling beneath him. His chest heaved faintly, but his eyes were closed, his face waxy in the headlights. George sprinted first, holstering his revolver as he dropped to one knee beside him. "He's alive," he barked, though the word sounded more like a command than a certainty. David skidded in beside him, slipping an arm under Marcus's shoulders. Together they heaved him up, his body sagging heavy between them. His boots dragged along the pavement, leaving dark streaks as they staggered him toward the cruiser. "Easy, easy," David muttered, though Marcus gave no sign he heard. His head lolled against George's shoulder, blood soaking down both their sleeves. The cruiser's rear door stood open. George and David shoved Marcus inside, bracing his body against the seat. His arms flopped limp at his sides, his jaw hung slack, eyes closed. David slid in next to Marcus while trying to keep pressure on the open wound. On the other side of the seat, Tyler and Megan pressed themselves into the corner, knees tucked to their chest. Megan cried softly, hiding her face against her rabbit, while Tyler just stared at Marcus, at the blood on his throat, the rise and fall of his chest that looked too shallow, too slow. George slammed the door shut, and when he turned, the thing was already moving. It peeled itself off the guardrail and the headlights, tall and dripping, claws gleaming wet. George didn't wait. He dove into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and jammed the shifter into reverse. "Hold on," he barked. The cruiser roared backward, tires shrieking against the asphalt. The sudden lurch threw Tyler and Megan into the floor well. The headlights carved wild arcs across the road as George spun the wheel. The creature surged forward, claws raking at the pavement, but the cruiser fishtailed clear, gravel spitting like gunfire. David kept one hand tied on Marcus's wound, motioning with the other for the kids to stay down. Go, go, he said. George jammed the brakes, wrenched the wheel, and the cruiser spun hard. The rear swung wide, red and blue lights flashing across the trees and the black face of the leg. Then the nose came around, tires biting, and the car shot forward down the road toward town. In the mirror, for one awful second, the creature filled the beams, tall, still grinning, blood streaking down its chin. George's eyes stayed locked on the road, jaw clenched. The lake fell away behind them. Back at the sheriff's station, the quiet felt heavier than the night outside. George sat at the table, a fresh cup of coffee cooling in his hands. Across from him, David slumped forward, his shirt stained with Marcus's blood. He hadn't said a word since the ambulance pulled out. The cruiser parked out front was empty now. The kids had been picked up by their grandparents an hour earlier, bundled into the back of a minivan, and driven away from town without a word. George had stood there and watched until the taillights disappeared, feeling like he'd handed over something fragile that might shatter before it reached safety. "You think Marcus will make it?" David finally asked. "He's tough. That wound on his neck, that would have killed me." George didn't answer right away. He stared into his cup, then set it down. "Doc Graham is doing what he can." David dragged a hand down his face. "We don't even know what it was, George. We don't even know what the hell that thing is." George's jaw tightened. He kept his eyes fixed on the tabletop. He exhaled hard through his nose. "We've got cops from Ashtabula and Paynesville running the shoreline, checking every stretch they can." David looked up. "How many?" "As many as I could get," George began. 10, 12 maybe. Depends on how much time they can give us." George rubbed a hand across his face. "It's not enough. Lake's too big. Too many places to miss." David leaned back, the chair groaning under his weight. "And still no sign of the parents?" George shook his head. "Not a thing. Just a few footprints by the bluff. Could be anyone. And those end about 20 yards from the water." Silence stretched. Both men knew what that meant, but neither wanted to say it. Finally, David spoke. "So what's our next move?" The sheriff didn't answer right away, just reached for his coffee. His hand hovered over the mug, but he didn't pick it up. "Well, those cops are here in town tonight," he began. "Good men, working in pairs, sticking close. I told him straight, there's something dangerous out there. Maybe I didn't spell it out, but they know enough to keep their eyes open. They brought extra firepower." David gave a slow nod. George leaned forward, lowering his voice. "And that buys us a little time. A night to think, to plan. We'll see what tomorrow brings. But people are going to want answers. I want answers. And I want my town safe again." David nodded. George fell silent. He stared into the coffee and thought. The two kids were alive, thank God, though no one could say what had happened to their parents. Both of the children kept repeating the same thing. Marcus Wilkins had saved them from a monster. George exhaled slowly. Marcus. There'd been a lot of blood. George wasn't a doctor, but he knew it was bad. It was unlikely the old mechanic would survive the night.